The cowboy everyone called the ghost of Winter's Bluff hadn't spoken to a woman in 8 years, until the widow with the dying child stood shivering on his porch, desperate enough to ask the question that would shatter his carefully built walls. What happens when survival forces two broken souls into a marriage neither wanted? When a ruthless land grab threatens to destroy the fragile family they're building? Stay until the end to see how their story unfolds, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind that scraped across Winter's Bluff in late November carried more than snow. It carried warnings. It howled through the gaps in the boarding house walls where Marian Doyle pressed her hands against her son's chest, counting his labored breaths in the darkness. 1, 2, 3 rattling inhales that sounded like glass grinding against stone. "Mama?" Elsie's small voice cut through the night from the other side of their shared bed. "Is Tom going to die?" Marian's fingers trembled against the worn quilt. She wanted to lie, to offer the kind of comfort mothers were supposed to give, but 8-year-old Elsie had already seen too much truth in their year of running. Instead, Marian pulled her daughter close and whispered the only honest thing she had left. "Not if I can help it, sweet girl. Not if I can help it." But helping it required money they didn't have, a home they'd lost, and time that was bleeding away faster than snow accumulated on the windowsill. The boarding house, a crooked, drafty building that smelled of tobacco and boiled cabbage, had given them shelter for 3 weeks. Mrs. Halstead, the proprietor with iron-gray hair and a softer heart than her scowl suggested, had extended their stay twice already. But even kindness had limits in a mining town where winter killed the unprepared. 6 weeks, Mrs. Halstead had said that morning, her weathered hands kneading bread dough with mechanical precision. "I've got miners coming in from the northern camps when the first real snow hits. I'll need your room, Mrs. Doyle. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is." 6 weeks. 42 days to find work, shelter, and a way to keep Tom alive through a Montana winter that was already showing its teeth. Marian had tried everything. She'd knocked on every door in Winter's Bluff, offering to cook, clean, mend, or teach. The schoolhouse didn't need a teacher. They had Miss Pritchard, young and energetic and without 2 children to feed. The general store didn't need help. Mr. Chen ran it with his 3 sons. The saloon keeper had looked her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl before suggesting an arrangement that sent her fleeing into the street. She'd walked 6 miles to the Murphy Ranch, where Mrs. Murphy had taken one look at Tom's hollow cheeks and shaken her head. "I can't take on another mouth to feed, dear. Not with winter coming. I'm sorry." The Jensen place. The Crawford homestead. The widow Patterson's farm. Every door the same answer. Some kind, some curt, all final. That left the ranches farther out, the isolated properties where men lived alone and winter pressed down like a gravestone. Marian had heard the names whispered in the boarding house dining room, discussed in the careful tones women used when speaking of men who'd removed themselves from polite society. "Old man Garrett's got that place up near Copper Ridge, but he's half mad from the loneliness. The Simmons brothers might take on help, but they're rough as tree bark and twice as mean. Then there's Creed, Harlan Creed, but nobody asks him for anything. Hasn't had a woman on his property since what happened." Marian had learned not to press for details when voices dropped that way. Every frontier town had its secrets, its ghosts, its men who'd been broken by circumstances no one discussed in daylight. She didn't need Harlan Creed's history. She needed a roof that didn't leak and walls that kept out the killing cold. "Creed won't even consider it," Mrs. Halstead had said when Marian asked. "He comes to town once a month for supplies, speaks to exactly no one except what's necessary to conduct business, and leaves before anyone can engage him in conversation. 8 years he's been like that, ever since—" She'd stopped, pressing her lips together. "Well, let's just say he's got his reasons for keeping to himself." But Marian Doyle had her own reasons for desperation, and they were currently huddled in a freezing room counting down to homelessness. The morning she decided to approach Harlan Creed, the sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. Tom's cough had worsened overnight, each spasm shaking his thin frame until Marian feared his ribs might crack. She'd held him through it, whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed anymore, promises she didn't know how to keep. "We're going into town," she announced, wrapping Elsie in 2 shawls and Tom in every blanket they owned. "There's someone I need to speak with." Mrs. Halstead caught her at the door, pressing a small bundle into her hands. "Bread and cheese. You'll need your strength." Her eyes, sharp and knowing, searched Marian's face. "You're going to try Creed, aren't you?" "I don't have any other options." "He'll say no. He always says no." "Then I'll be no worse off than I am now, Mrs." Halstead's expression softened into something like admiration. "You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Doyle, I'll give you that, but tough doesn't keep you warm when the snow's 6 feet deep and the temperature drops below 0. Don't wait too long to leave town if he refuses. The stage runs twice more before the pass closes." "Leave town. Go where?" "Back to St. Louis, where her late husband's creditors were still searching for payment on debts she hadn't known existed? To her sister in Philadelphia, who'd made it clear there was no room in her respectable home for a widow with 2 children. Marian had already run out of places to run. Winter's Bluff wasn't much of a town, a single main street with buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and never properly finished. The general store anchored one end, the saloon the other, with a scattering of shops, the boarding house, and a small church filling the space between. Beyond the town's ragged edges, the Montana wilderness stretched out in every direction, beautiful and merciless. Marian had heard Harlan Creed came to town on the last Saturday of each month, arriving just after dawn and leaving before noon. She positioned herself on the bench outside the general store, Tom propped against her side and Elsie's hand tight in hers, and waited. The other townspeople gave them sidelong glances as they passed, some sympathetic, others merely curious about the widow who'd appeared 3 weeks ago with a coughing child and no prospects. Marian kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, refusing to show the panic that churned in her stomach. He arrived at 7:30, materializing out of the gray morning like something conjured from the mist itself. Marian knew him immediately, though she'd never seen him before. There was something in the way he moved, deliberate, solitary, taking up exactly the space he needed and not an inch more. That marked him as a man who'd forgotten how to exist among others. Harlan Creed was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. He wore a heavy canvas coat, dark trousers, and boots that had seen countless miles. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but Marian caught a glimpse of dark hair, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and something else, a scar that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, silvery white against weather-tanned skin. He moved with the efficiency of a man who'd planned every action, tying his horse, a magnificent black gelding, to the rail outside the general store and heading directly for the entrance. He didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge the few people on the street, existed in a bubble of deliberate isolation that seemed almost physical in its intensity. Marian's courage nearly failed her. This man didn't want to be approached. Everything about him screamed, "Leave me alone," with a vehemence that made her want to gather her children and retreat to the boarding house. But Tom chose that moment to cough, a wet, painful sound that rattled in his chest, and Marian remembered why she was there. She stood, helping Tom to his feet while keeping Elsie close. Her legs felt unsteady, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd faced down creditors, survived her husband's sudden death, traveled halfway across the country with 2 children and diminishing funds. She could do this. Harlan Creed emerged from the general store carrying a box of supplies, his expression carved from stone. He moved toward his horse, clearly intent on loading up and leaving without speaking to a single soul. "Mr. Creed?" Marian's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, carrying across the cold morning air. He stopped. Didn't turn, but stopped, his shoulders tensing in a way that suggested he was calculating whether he could pretend he hadn't heard. Marian moved closer, positioning herself where he couldn't ignore her without being obviously rude. Up close, she could see more details. The scar that marked his face was old, well-healed, but prominent. His eyes, when they finally flicked toward her, were a startling blue-gray, the color of winter sky. And in them, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not cruelty, but wariness. The look of an animal that had been trapped before and wouldn't be caught again. "Mr. Creed, my name is Marian Doyle. I need to speak with you, please." "Not interested." His voice was rough, like it didn't get used much. He turned back to his horse, loading the supplies into his saddlebags with brisk movements. I'm looking for work. Housekeeping, cooking, anything you might need. I have 2 children, but they won't be any trouble. My son. I said no. Flat. Final. He untied his horse's reins. Desperation made Marion bold. She stepped forward, close enough that he'd have to physically push past her to leave. Mr. Creed, please, just listen. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, mend. I managed a household in St. Louis for 10 years. I don't need help. He was looking at her now, really looking, and there was something almost like pain in his eyes. I'm sorry for your circumstances, Mrs. Doyle, but I can't help you. Try the Murphy place. I did. I've tried everyone. You're my last option. Then you're out of options. He moved a step around her. Do you want a housekeeper, Mr. Creed? The question burst out of her, sharp and desperate. Or do you want another winter alone? Harlan froze. For a long moment, he just stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his scarred face. Then his gaze dropped to Tom, wrapped in blankets and swaying slightly on his feet, and to Elsie, wide-eyed and shivering despite her layers. The boy's sick. It wasn't a question. He needs warmth, medicine, food, things I can't provide in a boarding house that's closing in 6 weeks. Marion's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Creed. I'll work. I'll earn our keep. I just need a chance. Harlan's jaw worked, muscles tensing beneath skin. He looked away toward the mountains that ringed the valley, then back at Tom. How old? 11. He won't survive winter in town, not with that cough. The blunt assessment should have hurt, but Marion had already reached the same conclusion. I know. I live 20 miles from here. The ranch is isolated. No neighbors close by. Supply runs once a month if the weather holds, less if it doesn't. It's hard living, Mrs. Doyle. Harder than you're probably imagining. Harder than watching my son die? Marion met his eyes, refusing to look away. I don't think so. Something shifted in Harlan's expression. A crack in the armor, brief but unmistakable. He exhaled slowly, frost pluming in the cold air. I'll think about it. I need an answer today, Mr. Creed. We don't have time for... I said I'll think about it. His voice was sharp, but not unkind. I have business to finish. Meet me back here at 11. I'll give you my answer then. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't another immediate no. Marion nodded, gathering her children close as Harlan Creed walked away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the general store like a ghost retreating into shadow. The next 3 hours were the longest of Marion's life. She took the children to the church, where it was warmer and she could let Tom rest on a pew, while Elsie explored the small space with the cautious curiosity of a child who'd learned to find wonder in small things. Marion tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she made bargains with a God she wasn't sure was listening. Let him say yes. Let this work. I'll do anything, be anything. Just let my children survive this winter. At 11:15, she bundled them up again and returned to the bench outside the general store. The sky had grown darker, and the first fat snowflakes were beginning to fall, drifting down like warnings. Harlan emerged at precisely 11 o'clock, as if he'd been watching a pocket watch. He approached them slowly, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. I'll give you room and board through winter, he said without preamble. You'll keep house, cook, manage basic chores. The children can stay, but they'll need to help with age-appropriate tasks. No pay beyond room and board. Come spring, we'll reassess. Relief flooded through Marion so powerfully she felt dizzy. Thank you, Mr. Creed. Thank you so much. There's a problem. Harlan cut her off, his voice tight. You, me, and 2 children living under one roof without marriage. In a town like this, that'll destroy what's left of your reputation faster than winter'll kill that boy. People already talk too much. This'll make it worse. Marion's relief curdled into confusion. I don't care about my reputation. I care about keeping my children alive. You should care. Because when spring comes and you try to find work elsewhere, no one will hire a woman they think spent winter as some hermit's... He stopped, jaw clenching. They'll assume the worst. Always do. Then what are you suggesting? Harlan looked supremely uncomfortable, like each word was being dragged out of him against his will. Marriage. On paper only. Legal, but not... It wouldn't be real. Just a formality to keep the gossips quiet. Separate rooms. No expectations beyond the work arrangement. Come spring, if you want to leave, we'll figure out an annulment or divorce. Your reputation stays intact. Your children have shelter. I get help through winter. Marion stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. A marriage of convenience. A business arrangement dressed up in legal papers. It was practical, cold, and completely logical. It was also her only chance. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. "You don't know us. You clearly don't want people in your life. Why take this on?" Harlan was silent for a long moment, his eyes on Tom. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I've got a warm house sitting empty except for me. Because that boy needs help I can provide. And because—" He stopped, something painful crossing his face. "Because I'm tired of watching people die when I could have done something about it." There was a story there, buried beneath the words, but Marion didn't have the luxury of time to uncover it. Snow was falling harder now, and Tom was shivering despite his blankets. "All right," she said. "Yes, we'll accept your offer, Mr. Creed, all of it." Harlan nodded once, sharp and final. "Get your things from the boarding house. We'll see the minister, make it legal, and leave before the snow gets worse. Can you be ready in 2 hours?" "Yes." "Then I'll meet you back here at 1 o'clock. Don't be late. The trail gets dangerous after dark." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "Mrs. Doyle, you should know. I'm not a good man. I'm not cruel, but I'm not kind either. I'll keep you safe and fed and warm, but don't expect anything beyond that. Don't expect me to be something I'm not." Marion met his eyes steadily. "Mr. Creed, I'm not looking for a good man. I'm looking for a roof that doesn't leak and walls that keep out the cold. If you can provide that, we'll get along just fine." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. 1 o'clock. Don't be late." The ceremony, if it could be called that, took 15 minutes. Reverend Matthews performed it in his small office behind the church, his expression carefully neutral as he joined a desperate widow to a reclusive rancher in the most unromantic union Marion had ever witnessed. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just 4 signatures on a marriage certificate, Harlan's bold and sure, Marion's slightly shaky, and the Reverend's and his wife's as witnesses. "Do you, Harlan Creed, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Marion Doyle, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss. No celebration. Harlan paid the Reverend, folded the marriage certificate into his coat pocket, and gestured toward the door. "We need to go." The ride to Harlan's ranch took 4 hours on a wagon path that grew progressively rougher as they left civilization behind. Harlan drove the wagon with steady competence, his black gelding, whose name Marion learned was Midnight, tied to the back. He'd said perhaps 20 words since leaving town, most of them instructions about where to sit and how to brace against the jolting. Tom lay in the wagon bed, cushioned by their few belongings and covered with blankets Harlan had produced without comment. Elsie sat between Marion and Harlan on the driver's bench, her small body pressed against Marion's side for warmth. The landscape was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks disappearing into clouds. Pine forests pressed close to the trail, dark and primordial. Snow fell steadily, transforming the world into a study in black and white and gray. "How much farther?" Marion finally asked as the light began to fail. "Another hour. There's a ridge up ahead. Once we clear it, you'll see the valley." "Do you make this trip alone usually?" "Yes." "In all weather?" "Yes." "That must be difficult." Harlan glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It's quiet." Marion understood then. He wasn't running from difficulty. He was running from noise, from people, from whatever had happened 8 years ago that left him scarred and seeking silence. They crested the ridge just as the last light was dying, and Marion caught her breath. The valley spread below them, a natural bowl surrounded by mountains, with a river cutting through its center. And there, nestled against the western slope where the pines grew thick, was a house. It wasn't large, but it was solid. log construction with a stone chimney from which smoke rose in a steady plume. There was a barn nearby, a few outbuildings, and corrals that spoke of careful maintenance. It looked like the kind of place a person could make a life, if they were brave enough to face the isolation. "It's beautiful," Marion whispered. Harlan's hands tightened on the reins. "It's home." The word carried weight, layers of meaning that Marion couldn't quite parse. But as they descended into the valley, as the house grew larger and more real, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would survive this winter after all. Harlan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake with practiced ease. "Wait here," he ordered, climbing down and disappearing inside. Moments later, warm light spilled from the windows, and he returned, moving to the wagon bed to carefully lift Tom. "I'll get the boy settled. Bring the girl and come inside. Leave the bags. I'll get them after I tend the horses." Marion followed him into the house, Elsie clinging to her hand, and stopped just inside the doorway, taking in her new surroundings. The main room was simple but well built, a large fireplace dominating one wall, a kitchen area to the right, a heavy wooden table and chairs in the center, and doors leading to what must be bedrooms. Everything was clean, organized, and utterly devoid of softness. No curtains, no decorations, no signs that anyone actually lived here rather than just existed. Harlan carried Tom to one of the bedrooms, laying him gently on a bed covered with heavy quilts. "Get him warm," he said to Marion. "I'll bring in hot water so you can make tea. There's food in the pantry. Help yourself to whatever you need." "Mr. Creed, it's Harlan now. We're married, remember? Might as well use first names." "Harlan, then. Thank you for all of this." He looked at her, and for just a moment his guard dropped enough for her to see the man beneath the armor, lonely, wounded, and terribly uncertain about what he'd just invited into his carefully controlled world. "Don't thank me yet, Marion. Winter's long. We'll see if you still feel grateful come spring." Then he was gone, back out into the snow to tend his horses, leaving Marion standing in a strange house that was now somehow hers, with two children who depended on her to make this impossible situation work. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and got to work. There would be time later to process everything that had happened: the hasty marriage, the journey into isolation, the uncertainty of what came next. Right now, Tom needed warmth and medicine. Elsie needed food and reassurance, and this house needed to be transformed from a hermit's shelter into something resembling a home. Marion Doyle had faced impossible situations before. She'd survived them by putting one foot in front of the other, by doing the next necessary thing, and then the thing after that. She would survive this too. She had to. Because somewhere in the space of a single desperate day, she'd tied her family's fate to a scarred, silent cowboy who might save them all, or might be just another kind of danger she'd failed to see coming. Only time would tell which. The first night in Harlan Creed's house passed in a blur of unfamiliar sounds and shadows. Marion barely slept, listening to Tom's labored breathing from the bedroom they shared while Elsie curled against her side like a small furnace. Every creak of settling wood made her startle. Every gust of wind against the walls reminded her how far they were from anything resembling civilization. But the house was warm, blessedly, wonderfully warm, and that alone felt like a miracle. She rose before dawn, driven by habit and the need to prove her worth. In St. Louis, she'd managed a household with precision, maintaining schedules that would have impressed a military commander. Here, in this sparse bachelor's domain, she had no idea where anything was or what Harlan might expect, but she could at least make breakfast. The kitchen was better stocked than she'd anticipated. The pantry held flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, and preserved vegetables in neat rows. She found coffee, real coffee, stored in an airtight tin. By the time pale light began filtering through the windows, she had biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling in a cast-iron skillet, and coffee brewing in a battered pot. Harlan emerged from his bedroom just as she was plating the food, his hair damp and his shirt only half buttoned. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise flickering across his scarred face. "You didn't have to," he started. "Yes, I did. We had an agreement. I keep house. You provide shelter. This is me keeping house." Marion set a plate in front of him with perhaps more force than necessary. "Sit. Eat. The biscuits are best when they're hot." He sat, moving with the wariness of a man unaccustomed to being ordered around in his own home. He took a bite of biscuit, chewed slowly, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "These are good. My mother's recipe. She believed a good biscuit could solve most of life's problems." Marian poured coffee for both of them, the ritual oddly intimate in the quiet morning. She was wrong about that, but the biscuits are still good. The corner of Harlan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Your boy, how was he through the night?" "Restless. The cough kept waking him, but he was warmer than he's been in weeks, and that counts for something." Harlan nodded, finishing his breakfast in efficient silence. When he stood, he carried his plate to the wash basin without being asked, another small gesture that spoke of a man who'd been taking care of himself for a long time. "I need to check the livestock, repair a section of fence before the next storm hits. You and the children should stay inside today. Get settled. There's wood by the fireplace, more in the shed if you need it. Don't go wandering. It's easy to get lost in these woods, and the temperature drops fast when the sun goes down." "We'll stay close," Marian promised. "Is there anything specific you need done? Mending? Cleaning?" Harlan paused at the door, pulling on his heavy coat. "Just make yourselves comfortable. This is your home now, too. For the winter, anyway." The reminder stung more than it should have. This was temporary, a business arrangement with an expiration date. But Marian pushed the feeling aside and nodded. "Be careful out there." He left without answering, and the house suddenly felt both larger and lonelier. Elsie woke an hour later, emerging from the bedroom with sleep-tangled hair and wide eyes. "Mama, where are we?" "At our new home, sweet girl. Remember? We're staying with Mr. Creed through the winter." "The scary man with the scar?" "He's not scary, just quiet. Come, have breakfast." Tom slept until nearly noon, and when he finally stirred, his forehead was cool to the touch for the first time in days. The fever that had plagued him since St. Louis seemed to have broken, or at least retreated. Marian sent up a silent prayer of gratitude as she helped him to the table and watched him eat with something approaching appetite. "This place is huge, Mama," Tom said between bites, his voice still rough but stronger. "Did you see how big the barn is? And there are mountains everywhere. Can I go outside and explore?" "Not today. You need to rest and regain your strength. But maybe in a few days, if you're feeling better." "I feel better now." "You feel better than you did. That's not the same as being well." Marian smoothed his hair back from his forehead, relief making her gentle. "Give it time, sweetheart. We have all winter." The days developed a rhythm with surprising speed. Harlan rose before dawn and spent his daylight hours working the ranch, mending fences, tending cattle, chopping wood, performing the endless maintenance that survival demanded. He returned at dusk, snow-covered and exhausted, to find hot meals waiting and a house that no longer felt quite so empty. He ate in near silence, answered Elsie's increasingly bold questions with monosyllabic responses, and retreated to his bedroom as soon as propriety allowed. Marian, for her part, threw herself into domesticity with fierce determination. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, organized cupboards that didn't need organizing, and cooked meals far more elaborate than their simple situation required. It was displacement activity, she knew, a way to avoid thinking about the strangeness of her new life, the man she'd married out of desperation, the fact that she was utterly dependent on someone who remained a mystery. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change. Marian found fabric in a trunk and sewed simple curtains for the windows. Elsie picked wildflowers that had somehow survived the early snow and arranged them in a jar on the table. Tom, gaining strength daily in the warmth and regular meals, carved small wooden animals during the long afternoons and lined them up on the mantel. The house, which had been merely functional, began to feel inhabited. Harlan noticed. He didn't comment, but Marian caught him looking at the curtains with an expression she couldn't quite read, saw the way his fingers brushed against one of Tom's carvings as he passed. She wondered what he was thinking, this silent man who'd built walls so high she couldn't begin to see over them. The first real test came 2 weeks into their arrangement, when Marian made the mistake of entering Harlan's bedroom to change the sheets. She'd knocked first, heard no answer, and assumed he was out working. The room was as sparse as the rest of the house. A bed, a dresser, a single chair. But on the dresser sat a small framed photograph, and Marian's curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up, studying the image of a younger Harlan, unscarred and smiling, with his arm around a beautiful woman in a wedding dress. "What are you doing?" The voice behind her was cold enough to freeze blood. Marian spun, the photograph still in her hands, to find Harlan in the doorway. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "I was just changing the sheets. I saw the picture and you had no right." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the photograph from her hands with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his expression. "This room is off limits. I thought that was understood." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I was only trying to—" "I don't care what you were trying to do." Harlan's voice was flat, dangerous. "Stay out of my room. Stay out of my past. We have an arrangement, Marian. Room and board in exchange for housekeeping. That doesn't include prying into things that don't concern you." Marian's own temper flared. "I wasn't prying. I was doing the job you hired me to do. And if you want certain areas off limits, then say so clearly instead of expecting me to read your mind." They stood facing each other, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Harlan's jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, Marian thought he might yell, might finally let whatever he kept locked inside come pouring out. Instead, he took a deliberate step back. "You're right. I should have been clear. My room, my past, they're mine. Everything else, you're free to manage as you see fit. Are we understood?" "Perfectly." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "The sheets don't need changing. I can handle my own room." He left, and Marian stood alone, surrounded by the ghosts of whoever he'd been before life had carved that scar into his face and driven him into isolation. That night, dinner was a silent, strained affair. Harlan ate quickly and excused himself. Elsie, sensitive to tension, stayed quiet. Tom, oblivious as only an 11-year-old boy could be, chattered about the deer he'd seen from the window and asked when he could learn to ride a horse. "We'll see," Marian said absently, her mind still on the photograph, the beautiful woman, the smile that had been on Harlan's face, a smile she couldn't imagine him wearing now. She was washing dishes when Harlan reappeared, his coat in hand. "I'm going to check the livestock one more time before bed. Thought I heard something earlier, might be a cougar around. Keep the doors locked until I get back." "A cougar?" Marian's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Are we in danger?" "Not if you stay inside. They don't usually come this close to the house, but it's mating season. They get bold." He hesitated, then added, "I'll fire a warning shot if I see anything. Don't panic if you hear it." "All right, be careful." He almost smiled. "Always am." The shot came an hour later, sharp and sudden in the winter night. Elsie shrieked, and Tom jumped so hard he knocked over his chair. Marian gathered them close, heart pounding, and waited. Harlan returned 15 minutes later, rifle in hand and blood on his coat. "Got it. Big male, probably 3 years old. Must have been stalking the cattle for days. He won't bother us anymore." Marian stared at the blood, at the casual way he set the rifle by the door, at the reminder that this was a world where death came on silent pause and survival meant being faster, smarter, more willing to kill. "Are you hurt?" "No, the blood's not mine." He shrugged out of his coat, hanging it carefully on a peg. "I'll dress the carcass tomorrow. Take the hide to town next supply run. Cougar fur fetches a good price." "You're going to skin it?" "Can't let it go to waste. That's the rule out here. You take a life. You use every part you can." His eyes met hers, and she saw something almost like a challenge in them. "Does that bother you?" It should have. She'd lived a civilized life in St. Louis, where meat came from the butcher wrapped in brown paper and death happened out of sight. But looking at this man who just killed a predator to protect his livestock, his home, her children, she found she wasn't bothered at all. "No," she said honestly, "it doesn't." Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or surprise. "Good, because that's reality out here. Everything's always trying to kill you or take what's yours. You fight back or you die. No middle ground." "Is that how you got the scar?" The question escaped before Marian could stop it. "Fighting back?" Harlan's face closed down immediately. Good night, Marion. He retreated to his room, leaving Marion alone with her curiosity and the growing certainty that understanding this man was going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The weather turned vicious 3 days later. Snow fell in sheets, driven by winds that howled like wounded animals. The temperature plummeted so fast that the water in the wash basin froze solid overnight. Harlan spent hours breaking ice from the livestock troughs, making sure the animals had shelter, battling elements that seemed determined to kill anything foolish enough to exist in them. He came in at midday, ice crystals frozen in his hair and eyebrows, his face red with cold. Marion took one look at him and pointed to the fireplace. Sit. Warm up before you go back out there. I need to... Sit, Harlan. You're no good to your cattle if you freeze to death. He sat, surprising her with his compliance. Marion poured hot coffee and pressed the cup into his hands, noticing how his fingers trembled slightly as they wrapped around the warmth. She'd made stew that morning, thick with vegetables and salt pork, and she ladled a generous portion into a bowl. Eat. Then you can go back to playing hero with the livestock. Not playing. But he ate, the warmth slowly returning to his face as the food and fire did their work. Storm like this, we might be snowed in for days, maybe a week if it keeps up. Do we have enough supplies? Plenty. I always stock up before winter. Learned that lesson the hard way my first year out here. He paused, then added, We'll be fine. Just boring. Nothing to do but wait it out. Boring turned out to be an understatement. By the second day of the storm, the walls felt like they were closing in. Tom and Elsie, initially excited by the snow, grew restless. Harlan retreated into silence, mending tack and maintaining equipment with methodical focus. Marion cooked, cleaned, and tried not to think about how small the house felt with all of them trapped inside. The third night, as wind rattled the windows and snow piled higher against the walls, Tom's cough returned with a vengeance. It started as a tickle, the kind that could be dismissed as lingering irritation. By midnight, it was a full assault, wet and deep, shaking his entire body with each spasm. Marion sat with him through the night, propping him up to help him breathe, making steam from boiling water to ease his lungs. But nothing helped. The cough worsened, each breath a fight, each exhale a rattle that spoke of fluid and inflammation and dangers Marion didn't have the knowledge to combat. "Mama," Tom gasped between fits, "I can't breathe right." Terror locked around Marion's heart like a fist. This was what she'd been running from, what she'd crossed half a country to prevent, watching her son suffocate in the night while she stood helpless. "I know, sweetheart. I know. Just try to stay calm. Breathe slow." A knock on the bedroom door. Harlan's voice, rough with sleep. "Marion, is he all right?" She opened the door, and whatever he saw in her face made him push past her immediately. He knelt beside Tom's bed, pressing a hand to the boy's forehead, listening to the horrible wet sounds of his breathing. How long has he been like this? Hours. I've tried steam. I've tried propping him up. I've tried everything I know, but it's getting worse. Marion's voice cracked. "I don't know what else to do." Harlan stood abruptly. "Keep him upright. I'll be right back." He disappeared, returning minutes later with an armful of supplies, strips of cloth, a jar of something pungent, dried herbs Marion didn't recognize. He moved with the decisive confidence of someone who'd done this before, someone who knew exactly what needed to happen. "We need to break up the congestion in his chest," Harlan explained, already mixing the herbs into boiling water. "The steam helps, but it's not enough. This is slippery elm bark and horehound. It'll thin the mucus, make it easier to expel. And this," he held up the jar, "is camphor salve. We'll rub it on his chest and back, help open up his airways." "Where did you learn this?" "My mother. She kept my little brother alive through 3 winters of lung fever before—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "She knew frontier medicine. Taught me what she could." "Before what?" Marion wanted to ask, but Tom chose that moment to convulse with another coughing fit. And everything else became secondary to the immediate crisis. They worked together through the night, Harlan making teas from bark and roots, Marion coaxing Tom to drink them despite their bitter taste. Harlan showed her how to position Tom to drain his lungs, how to percuss his back to loosen the congestion. When Tom's breathing grew so labored, he started to panic. Harlan sat beside him and spoke in low, steady tones about the ranch, the mountains, the way spring came to the valley in a rush of green and wildflowers. "You'll see it," Harlan told the gasping boy. "Come March, everything changes. The snow melts so fast you can hear it running in rivers down the mountain. The meadows fill with flowers, purple and yellow and white. And the elk come down from the high country with their new calves. You'll be strong enough to ride out and see them by then. I promise." Tom clung to those promises like lifelines, his eyes locked on Harlan's scarred face, as if the man's certainty could override his body's rebellion. Dawn came gray and cold, but Tom was breathing easier. The desperate rasp had faded to a productive cough, bringing up the congestion instead of trapping it. His color was better, the panic gone from his eyes. Marion, exhausted and wrung out with relief, found herself crying. She tried to hide it, turning away to busy herself with straightening blankets, but Harlan saw. "He's going to be all right," Harlan said quietly. "The fever's down. The congestion's breaking up. He'll be weak for a few days, but he'll recover." "I thought—" Marion's voice failed. She tried again. "I thought I was going to lose him, like I lost James, like I lose everything eventually." She felt Harlan's hand on her shoulder, tentative and awkward, as if he'd forgotten how to offer comfort. "You didn't lose him. He's here. He's safe. And I'll make sure he stays that way." Marion turned to face him, this strange, scarred man who'd saved her son's life with frontier remedies and steady competence. "Why did you really agree to this arrangement, Harlan? It wasn't just about practicality or keeping gossips quiet. What made you say yes?" Harlan's hand dropped from her shoulder. He looked away, toward the window where dawn was slowly brightening the snow-covered landscape. When he spoke, his voice was so low she almost didn't hear it. "Because 8 years ago, I watched someone die who shouldn't have, and I swore I'd never stand by helpless again if I had the power to prevent it." He met her eyes, and she saw old pain there, buried deep but never forgotten. "Your boy needed help. I could provide it. That's all the reason I needed." "The woman in the photograph," Marion said gently, "was she my wife? Sarah." The name came out like something precious and terrible. "She died in childbirth, the baby too. The midwife was snowed in, couldn't make it in time. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't enough. They both—" His voice broke. "They both died in my arms while I begged God for help that never came." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that 8 years hadn't diminished. Marion understood then, the isolation, the refusal to let anyone close, the walls he'd built so high and thick. He wasn't just protecting himself from loss. He was punishing himself for surviving it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Harlan, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But the way he said it suggested no amount of time would ever be long enough. "Get some rest. I'll watch the boy for a while." He settled into the chair beside Tom's bed, and Marion was too exhausted to argue. She stretched out on her own bed with Elsie curled against her and fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When she woke hours later, the storm had passed. Pale winter sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a house that felt different somehow, less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. She found Harlan still in the chair, asleep with his head tilted back and his hand resting protectively on Tom's shoulder. Her son slept peacefully, his breathing steady and clear. Something shifted in Marion's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. Respect. But underneath those simpler emotions, something more complicated was taking root, something that felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. She'd married a stranger out of desperation. But the man sleeping in that chair, the man who'd fought through the night to save her son, who carried his dead wife's memory like a stone in his pocket, he wasn't a stranger anymore. He was Harlan, her husband. And whether either of them wanted to admit it, that was starting to mean something neither of them had planned for. The days after Tom's crisis passed in careful navigation. Harlan retreated back into his customary silence, as if sharing his grief had cost him something he couldn't afford to lose again. But small changes remained. He checked on Tom each morning before heading out to work, asking gruff questions about how the boy had slept. He started taking his evening coffee at the table instead of retreating to his room immediately after dinner. When Elsie asked him to teach her how to whittle, he spent an entire evening showing her how to hold the knife, his scarred hands guiding her small ones with surprising patience. "You're good with them," Marian observed one night after the children had gone to bed. "The children. You're patient in a way I didn't expect." Harlan shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Kids are honest. They don't expect you to be something you're not. Makes them easier to be around than most adults." "Is that why you've been alone so long? Because adults expect too much?" "Adults expect explanations, want to fix things that can't be fixed, offer sympathy I don't want." He stared into his coffee cup. "Easier to just not engage." "But you engaged with us. With me." "I had my reasons." "Your dead wife and child." Harlan's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and defensive, but whatever he saw in her expression made him deflate slightly. "Partly, mostly. I don't know. Maybe I was just tired of winters alone." It was the most honest thing he'd said since that desperate night with Tom, and Marian treasured it like a gift. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were tired. My son is alive because of it." "He's alive because he's strong, because you got him somewhere warm in time. I just helped." "You saved his life, Harlan. You can call it what it was." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition that they'd crossed some invisible line during those dark hours. They weren't just two people sharing space anymore. They were becoming something more complicated. The realization terrified them both. Harlan stood abruptly. "I should check the livestock one more time before bed." "It's freezing out there." "That's why I should check." He grabbed his coat, already moving toward the door. "Lock up behind me." He fled, and Marian let him go, understanding that some truths needed space to breathe before they could be spoken aloud. The town's reaction to their marriage came swift and surgical when Harlan made his monthly supply run in December, this time with Marian and the children accompanying him. The journey took most of a day through snow-packed trails, and by the time they reached Winter's Bluff, all four of them were frozen and exhausted. The whispers started immediately. Marian felt eyes following them as they walked from the general store to the post office, heard the sudden silences when they entered buildings, saw the knowing looks exchanged between townspeople who thought they understood exactly what kind of arrangement the reclusive Harlan Creed had made with the desperate widow. Mrs. Halstead, at least, seemed genuinely pleased. "I heard you married," she said, pulling Marian aside while Harlan loaded supplies. "I was worried when you left town like that, but it seems things worked out." "They did. Harlan's been kind. The children are warm and fed. Tom is getting stronger every day." "That's good. Real good." Mrs. Halstead lowered her voice. "Don't pay attention to the gossips. They don't understand that sometimes survival requires unconventional arrangements. You did what you had to do, and there's no shame in that." But others weren't so understanding. At the post office, the clerk handed Harlan his mail with a smirk that made Marian's skin crawl. "Heard you finally found yourself some company, Creed. Must get lonely out there all winter. Nice to have help." The insinuation was clear. Harlan's face went hard as stone. "Careful how you speak about my wife." The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. The clerk's smirk faded. "No offense meant, just making conversation." "Make it elsewhere." They left quickly after that, but the damage was done. Marian felt it in the weight of stares, the whispered comments barely hidden behind hands. To these people, she was exactly what she'd feared becoming. A woman of questionable morals who'd secured her position through means they could only imagine. "I'm sorry," Harlan said as they headed back to the ranch, his voice tight with anger. "I should have known it would be like this. Should have prepared you better. You told me how it would be. I chose not to care, remember?" But Marian's hands were shaking, her throat tight with humiliation she'd convinced herself wouldn't hurt. Elsie, perceptive as always, spoke from the back of the wagon. "Why were those people so mean, Mama?" "They weren't mean, sweetheart. Just curious." "They were mean," Tom said flatly. "They think we're bad people. I could tell." Harlan's jaw clenched. "What people think doesn't matter. What matters is truth. And the truth is, we're a family helping each other survive winter. Nothing shameful in that. A family. The word settled over them like unexpected warmth. Marion glanced at Harlan, but he was staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. That night, after the children were asleep, Harlan knocked on Marion's bedroom door. "Can I come in? Need to talk to you about something." Marion, already in her nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hesitated. The bedroom felt too intimate for conversation, but the children were sleeping and there was nowhere else truly private. "All right," Harlan entered, keeping carefully to the doorway, maintaining distance as if proximity itself was dangerous. "About today, the way people treated you. It's only going to get worse as winter goes on and the gossip spreads. I need you to know, if you want to leave come spring, I'll make sure you have enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere they don't know our arrangement. I'll write you a reference, say you were a housekeeper, whatever you need." "You're already planning for me to leave?" "I'm giving you options. That was always the deal." Marion studied him in the lamplight, this complicated man who kept one foot always pointed toward the door, ready to run from any emotion that threatened to become real. "What if I don't want to leave?" Harlan went very still. "What? What if spring comes and I decide to stay? What then? Why would you want to stay? You heard those people today. You know what they think. I also heard you defend me, call me your wife like you meant it." Marion took a step closer. "And I've seen how you are with my children, how you saved Tom's life, how you're teaching Elsie to whittle. This isn't just a business arrangement anymore, Harlan, and we both know it." "Marion," his voice held a warning, but also something that sounded like hope. "I'm not saying I'm in love with you. I'm not asking you to love me. But I am saying that this—" She gestured at the house around them. "This feels more like home than anywhere I've been since James died. And I think maybe you feel it too, even if you're too scared to admit it." Harlan's face was a war between desire and terror. "I can't go through that again, caring about someone, losing them. I barely survived it the first time." "Then don't care about me," Marion said softly. "But don't push me away either. Let's just see where this goes. No promises, no expectations, just honest survival, together. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair to me." They stood in the lamplight, the space between them charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Finally, Harlan nodded, the gesture small and reluctant. "All right, we'll see where it goes. But Marion, if I hurt you, it won't be on purpose. I'm not built for this anymore. For connection. You need to know that going in." "I know, but you're trying, and that counts for something." He left then, but the door stayed slightly ajar, a metaphor neither of them would acknowledge but both understood. December deepened into January, and the valley transformed into something from a fairy tale. Snow piled higher than the windows. Ice turned the river into a sculpture garden. The temperature dropped so low that breath froze in the air, crystalline and beautiful and deadly. Inside the house, life continued in its careful rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Harlan lingered at breakfast, trading observations about the weather with Marion. He taught Tom how to tend the livestock, bringing the boy along on morning chores when the cold wasn't too brutal. He carved Elsie a small doll, his scarred hands moving with unexpected delicacy. And at night, after the children slept, he and Marion sat by the fire drinking coffee, trading stories in careful increments. She told him about St. Louis, about James's sudden death from a heart condition no one had suspected, about the creditors who'd circled like vultures. He told her about his parents' ranch, about learning to survive in Montana's harsh embrace, about the dreams he'd had before Sarah's death had killed them all. "I wanted children," he admitted one night, the words pulled from some deep place. "A whole house full of noise and chaos. Sarah did too. We were going to build an addition, make room for the family we'd have." "You still could," Marion ventured. "Have that. Someday." Harlan shook his head. "That dream died with Sarah. I don't have it in me to want it again." "But you're good with Tom and Elsie." "That's different. They're not mine. There's a distance there that makes it safe." The words hurt more than Marion wanted to admit, but she understood them. Harlan had built his entire life around avoiding the kind of pain that nearly destroyed him. Letting himself want things, want her, want a real family, would mean tearing down walls he'd spent 8 years constructing. She could wait. She'd survived worse than waiting. The real threat came not from within, but from without, arriving on a bitter January morning in the form of a rider on a bay horse, picking his way carefully through the snow toward Harlan's ranch. Marion saw him from the window and called to Harlan, who was in the barn. He emerged, rifle in hand, his expression wary. "Stay inside," he ordered. The rider dismounted, a well-dressed man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from money and power. Marion watched from the window as he and Harlan talked, saw the way Harlan's shoulders tensed, saw the papers the man handed over. When Harlan returned, his face was carved from granite. "That was Elias Thornwell's lawyer." "Who's Elias Thornwell?" "My neighbor to the east. We share a creek that runs between our properties. He's been trying to buy my land for years, wants to consolidate his holdings, turn this valley into some kind of cattle empire." Harlan threw the papers onto the table. "Now he's claiming water rights to the entire creek. Says my use of it is illegal. He's got lawyers, documents, some territorial law I've never heard of. If he wins, I lose access to water. No water means no livestock. No livestock means no ranch." Marion picked up the papers, scanning legal language she barely understood. "Can he do this?" "Apparently he thinks he can. There's a hearing set for March in Winter's Bluff. I have to appear and defend my claim, or he wins by default." "Then you'll appear. You'll fight this." Harlan laughed, bitter and sharp. "With what? He's got lawyers. I've got—" He gestured helplessly. "Me. A cowboy who barely passed 6th grade. You think I can stand up in a courtroom and argue legal precedent? You can tell the truth, that you've been using that water for years, that your family was here first. Truth doesn't matter when the other side has money and power and the law written in their favor." Marion watched the defeat creep into his expression, watched him retreat into the fatalism that had defined him for so long. And she felt something fierce ignite in her chest, something protective and furious, and utterly unwilling to let this man lose the home he'd built, the life he'd carved from wilderness. "Then we'll find a way to make truth matter," she said. "We'll fight this together, Harlan. You're not alone anymore." He looked at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language, like the concept of together was so alien he couldn't process it. But underneath the confusion, she saw something else, a flicker of hope, fragile and tentative, but undeniably there. "Why would you help?" he asked quietly. "This isn't your fight. Come spring, you'll leave anyway. Why involve yourself in this mess?" Marion met his eyes steadily. "Because whether you want to admit it or not, this has become my home too. Those children sleeping in the next room, they're happy here, safe. And you've given us something I thought we'd lost forever. I'm not going to stand by and watch someone take that away without a fight." Harlan's throat worked, emotion breaking through the careful control. "I don't know how to do this. How to let people fight for me." "Then learn. Starting now." Marion picked up the legal papers. "We have 6 weeks until that hearing. 6 weeks to build a case, gather evidence, find a way to prove your claim is legitimate. So let's get started." For the first time since the lawyer's visit, something like determination flickered in Harlan's eyes. "You really think we have a chance?" "I think we have something better than a chance. We have the truth, we have time, and we have each other. That's more than most people get." Outside, the winter wind howled its ancient song of cold and danger and survival against impossible odds. But inside, in the warmth of the house they were slowly transforming into a home, two broken people found themselves standing together against a threat neither could face alone. And in that moment, the careful boundaries of their arrangement, the distance they'd maintained, the walls they'd built, began to crumble into something neither of them had expected, something that looked dangerously like family. The work began the next morning, brutal and methodical. Harlan pulled out every scrap of documentation he possessed, deeds, property surveys, receipts from when his father had first claimed the land 40 years ago. Marion organized them on the kitchen table, creating order from chaos while Tom and Elsie watched with wide eyes, sensing the gravity even if they didn't fully understand it. "My father filed his claim in 1845. Harlan explained, pointing to a yellow document with cramped handwriting. He was one of the first settlers in this valley, built the original cabin where the barn stands now. The creek was our water source from the beginning. It's documented in the territorial records. But Thornwell's claiming it anyway? Marion studied the legal papers the lawyer had delivered. On what grounds? Something about prior appropriation doctrine. Whoever filed first has superior rights, and he's got documents claiming his father filed before mine. Harlan's jaw tightened. It's a lie. I know it's a lie. But lies written on expensive paper by expensive lawyers have a way of becoming truth. Then we need to prove it's a lie. Where are the original territorial records kept? Winter's Bluff has copies, but the originals are in Helena. That's a 5-day ride in good weather. In winter, he shook his head. Impossible. The passes are closed until April at the earliest. Marion refused to accept defeat. Then we work with what we have. We gather testimony from people who knew your father, who can verify when he settled here. We document your continuous use of the water. We build a case so strong that even bought and paid for judges can't ignore it. There aren't many people left who knew my father. Most of the old-timers have died or moved on. Harlan slumped in his chair, the weight of impossibility pressing down on him. And the ones who are left, why would they testify for me? I've spent 8 years pushing everyone away. Because people remember kindness, even if it happened a long time ago. Marion placed her hand over his, a gesture that would have been too intimate a month ago, but now felt necessary. You're not the villain you've convinced yourself you are, Harlan. Someone out there will help. We just need to find them. The first person they approached was Mrs. Halstead. Harlan made the ride to Winter's Bluff alone 3 days later, returning with cautious optimism on his weathered face. She remembers, Skip, he told Marion as he stamped snow from his boots. She and her late husband came to the valley in 1847, 2 years after my father. She says she clearly recalls my father already having established his water rights by then. She'll testify. That's good. That's a start. Marion poured him hot coffee, her mind already racing ahead. Who else? Old man Garrett. He's half crazy like everyone says, but his memory goes back even further than Mrs. Halstead's. If I can get him coherent enough, he might remember the early days. Harlan paused. And there's Samuel Brooks. He ran the assay office back when this was mining country. He's retired now, but he kept meticulous records. If anyone has documentation about early land claims, it would be him. Over the next 2 weeks, they built their case piece by piece. Harlan rode out to speak with anyone who might remember, while Marion organized their findings, copied documents in her careful handwriting, and drafted arguments she barely understood but refused to abandon. Tom helped by creating a timeline on brown paper, marking every significant date they could verify. Even Elsie contributed, sorting papers by date with the serious concentration of someone who understood this mattered. The house transformed into a war room. Maps covered the walls showing property lines and watercourses. Stacks of papers grew on every surface. Harlan worked late into the night, his exhaustion evident, but his determination finally matching Marion's. You're good at this, he said one evening, watching her annotate a document with notes about which testimony it supported. Organizing chaos into something useful. Where did you learn it? Managing a household teaches you to keep track of 1,000 details at once. This isn't so different. Marion set down her pen, flexing cramped fingers. Besides, when the alternative is losing everything, you find skills you didn't know you had. Is that what we're doing? Losing everything? Not if I have anything to say about it. She met his eyes across the paper-strewn table. We're going to win this, Harlan. I can feel it. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in the way his expression softened, in the way hope flickered to life despite his best efforts to smother it. But before he could respond, the wind outside shifted, rising from whisper to shriek in the span of heartbeats. Harlan's head snapped toward the window. Storm's coming. Bad one by the sound of it. He was right. Within an hour, the wind was battering the house with fists of ice and snow. The temperature plummeted so fast that frost formed on the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. Harlan made emergency trips to the barn, securing the livestock and bringing in extra wood, returning each time more covered in snow and ice. It's going to be a 3-day blow. he announced after his final trip, his face grim. Maybe longer. I've seen storms like this before. They settle in and don't let go. By morning, snow had drifted halfway up the walls. The world outside the windows was a whiteout, visibility reduced to nothing. The house creaked and groaned under the assault, and Marian found herself grateful for the solid log construction that stood between them and death. The children, initially excited by the drama of the storm, grew restless by the second day. Marian invented games, told stories, anything to keep them occupied in the confined space. Harlan carved more animals for Elsie's growing collection and taught Tom to play chess on a board that had belonged to his father. But by the third night, tension was fraying everyone's nerves. The storm showed no signs of abating. They were running low on lamp oil, and Tom's cough, which had been dormant for weeks, began to return. Marian noticed it first, a small tickle that made him clear his throat repeatedly. Then came the deeper coughs, the ones that rattled in his chest and made her stomach clench with remembered terror. It's just the dry air from the fire, she told herself, told Harlan when he looked at her with concern. Once the storm passes and we can air out the house, he'll be fine. But that night, Tom's breathing changed. Marian woke to the sound she'd been dreading, the wet, labored gasps of congestion settling deep in his lungs. She lit a lamp with shaking hands and found her son struggling for air, his lips tinged with blue in the lamplight. "Harlan!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. "Harlan, help!" He burst into the room, barely dressed, his scarred face stark with alarm. One look at Tom and he was moving, giving orders with the calm authority of someone who'd faced this crisis before. "Get water boiling, all the pots we have. We need steam, constant steam, and bring me the herbs from the top shelf in the pantry, the ones in the blue jar." Marian ran, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the lamp. Behind her, she could hear Harlan speaking to Tom in low, steady tones. "Easy now, slow breaths. I know it's hard, but panic makes it worse. That's it. Just like that." She returned with arms full of supplies to find Harlan had propped Tom upright, pillows supporting him from behind. The boy's face was gray, his eyes wide with fear, each breath a visible struggle. "Mama," he gasped, "can't breathe." "I know, baby, I know. We're going to fix it." But her voice broke on the words, terror clawing at her throat. Harlan took the jars from her hands. "Listen to me, both of you. This is bad, but it's not hopeless. We caught it early. The steam will help, the herbs will help, and Tom is strong. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Marian nodded, unable to speak. Tom managed a small movement of his head that might have been agreement. "Good. Marian, get those pots boiling. We're going to turn this room into a steam house. Tom, I'm going to make you tea that tastes like Satan's bathwater, but you're going to drink every drop. Then we're going to work on getting that mucus out of your lungs. It's going to be a long night, but we'll get through it together. Understand?" The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that survival was possible, gave them both something to cling to. Marian ran to the kitchen and set every pot they owned to boil. Soon, steam filled the bedroom, thick and medicinal from the herbs Harlan added. He made Tom drink tea so bitter the boy gagged, then rubbed camphor salve on his chest and back until the sharp scent overwhelmed everything else. "Now we wait," Harlan said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "And every hour, we're going to help drain his lungs. It's going to hurt, and he's going to hate us for it, but it's the only way." The hours that followed were a blur of steam and fear and desperate prayer. Every 60 minutes, Harlan positioned Tom and percussed his back, forcing the congestion to loosen and expel. Each time, Tom coughed until he vomited, bringing up horrifying amounts of mucus, crying from pain and exhaustion. And each time, Marian held him afterward, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep, while Harlan prepared more tea, more steam, more of the brutal treatment that was either killing or curing her son. Elsie woke sometime after midnight, drawn by the sounds of Tom's distress. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown, her small face crumpling. "Is Tom going to die like Papa did?" Marian's heart shattered. She reached for her daughter, pulling her close. "No, baby, no. Harlan is going to make sure he's okay. Promise?" Marian looked at Harlan, who met her eyes over Tom's laboring form. She saw exhaustion there and fear, but also determination that wouldn't bend. "I promise," Marian said, and prayed she wasn't lying. Dawn came gray and terrible. The storm still raged outside, indifferent to the battle being waged within the house. Tom had declined through the night, despite everything they'd done. His breathing was more labored, his color worse, his consciousness starting to slip. Harlan's face was haggard, his hands shaking from exhaustion as he prepared yet another round of treatment. "We need to be more aggressive. I was hoping the herbs alone would break it up, but—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "There's a technique my mother used as a last resort. It's dangerous. If done wrong, it could collapse his lung. But if we don't try something different, he's going to drown in his own fluids." "Do it," Marian said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." "You should know." Harlan's voice cracked. "I watched my brother die from this. My mother tried everything, including this technique. It didn't work. He was 8 years old, and I held him while he couldn't finish." Marian understood then the depth of Harlan's terror, the reason he'd isolated himself, the walls he'd built against caring about anyone. He wasn't just fighting to save Tom. He was fighting against every nightmare that had haunted him for decades. "You saved Tom once before," she said, gripping his hand. "You can do it again. I believe in you." Something in her words reached him. He squeezed her hand once, hard, then turned to Tom with renewed focus. "All right, here's what we're going to do." The technique was brutal. Harlan positioned Tom at an angle that seemed impossibly uncomfortable, then used firm, rhythmic pressure on specific points of his back and chest, forcing the lungs to expel their contents through sheer mechanical action. Tom screamed, the sound raw and animal. Marian had to hold him down, her own tears falling as her son fought against the treatment that was hurting him to save him. "Keep going," Harlan commanded, his own face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "It's working. Look, it's working." And it was. Horrifying amounts of mucus were coming up, thick and green and deadly. Tom coughed and coughed until Marian thought he might break, but each coughing fit brought up more of the congestion, clearing space in his lungs for precious air. 30 minutes that felt like hours. Harlan worked with the single-minded intensity of someone fighting death itself, and Marian held her son and prayed to any god that might be listening. Finally, blessedly, Tom drew a breath that didn't rattle. Then another. His color began to improve, the blue fading from his lips. He slumped in exhaustion, but his breathing was clear. Harlan sat back, his hands shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. "He's through the worst. He'll need to stay upright for the rest of the day, keep taking the herbs, but His voice broke entirely. "He's going to be okay." Marian couldn't speak. She pulled Tom close, feeling his chest rise and fall with breaths that were finally, blessedly steady. Elsie climbed onto the bed, curling against her brother, and Harlan just sat there, his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They stayed like that as the morning light grew stronger, as the storm outside continued its assault, as the world narrowed to the simple miracle of a child breathing. Marian reached out with her free hand and touched Harlan's shoulder, and he looked up at her with eyes that held every ounce of the terror he'd been carrying. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on him. On us." Harlan's hand covered hers, his grip almost desperate. "I couldn't. If I'd lost him—" He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. Marian understood. Saving Tom hadn't just been about keeping a child alive. It had been about Harlan saving himself from the ghosts that haunted him, proving that this time, he could be enough. "You were enough," Marian said, reading his thoughts with the unsettling accuracy of someone who'd learned to see past his walls. "You saved him, Harlan. You did what you couldn't do before. And that matters." He nodded, unable to speak, and they sat together in the growing light while Tom slept peacefully for the first time in hours and Elsie dozed against her brother's side. The storm broke 2 days later, revealing a world transformed by snow and ice. Harlan spent the first clear day digging out, checking on livestock that had miraculously survived, assessing damage that turned out to be minimal. But something fundamental had changed in him. He moved differently, spoke more freely, looked at Marian and the children with an openness that would have been impossible weeks ago. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, he found Marion by the fire, mending one of Tom's shirts. He sat across from her, his hands clasped between his knees, his scarred face reflecting firelight. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About Sarah. About what happened." Marion set down her mending, giving him her full attention. "We'd been married 3 years when she got pregnant. We were so happy, stupidly happy, the way young people are when they think nothing bad can touch them." His voice was rough with old pain. "The pregnancy was hard from the start. She was sick constantly, couldn't keep food down. The midwife said it was normal, that it would pass. It didn't." He paused, staring into the fire. Marion waited, letting him find the words. "Labor came early, in February. Middle of a blizzard worse than the one we just survived. I rode for the midwife, but the snow was too deep, the cold too brutal. She couldn't make it. So I came back, and it was just me and Sarah and the baby trying to be born." His hands clenched. "I'd helped with calving, with foaling. I thought I knew what to do. But humans aren't cattle, and everything went wrong. Harlan, you don't have to—" "I do. I need to say it out loud, to someone who—" He swallowed hard. "To someone who matters." The words hung between them, heavy with implication neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "The baby was breech. I tried to turn him, but I didn't know how. Sarah was bleeding too much, screaming, begging me to save the baby, even if it meant—" His voice cracked. "She died begging me to cut the baby out. But I couldn't do it. And so they both died, and I sat in this house covered in her blood, holding a son who never drew breath, and I swore I'd never care about anyone again, because caring meant loss, and loss meant that kind of pain, and I wouldn't survive it twice." Tears streamed down his face, the grief finally given voice after 8 years of silence. Marion moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his clenched hands in hers. "It wasn't your fault. You did everything you could with the knowledge you had. Sarah knew that. I'm sure she knew that. But what if I could have done more? What if I'd ridden faster for the midwife, or learned more about childbirth, or what if the storm hadn't come? What if labor hadn't started early? What if medicine was better and doctors were closer and life was fair?" Marion's voice was firm. "You can what if yourself to death, Harlan, but it won't change anything. Sarah died, your son died, and you survived, and that survival doesn't make you guilty. It just makes you human." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the boy he'd been before tragedy had carved him into someone harder. "How did you survive it? Losing your husband?" "By putting one foot in front of the other, by focusing on the children, by refusing to let grief be the thing that defined me." She squeezed his hands. "And by accepting help when it was offered, even when I was too proud to think I needed it, kind of like someone else I know." That pulled a rough laugh from him. "You think I need help?" "I think you've been drowning alone for 8 years, and I think almost losing Tom forced you to realize that maybe, just maybe, you're tired of drowning." Harlan was quiet for a long moment, his hands still clasped in hers. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid. Of caring again. Of losing again. Of not being enough when it matters. I'm afraid too. Of being dependent. Of trusting someone who might leave. Of building a life that could be torn away." Marion met his eyes. "But I'm more afraid of never trying. Of living half a life because the full thing seems too risky." "When did you get so brave?" "When I had to be, same as you." She stood, still holding his hands, pulling him up with her. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight. We don't have to make promises neither of us is ready to keep. But we can stop pretending this is just a business arrangement, can't we?" Harlan's thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "What do you want it to be?" "I don't know yet. Something more than survival. Something that feels like—" She struggled for the word. "Like home." "Home." He tested the word like it was foreign. "I haven't had that since Sarah died. Didn't think I could again. Maybe we could build it, together, with Tom and Elsie, with honesty instead of walls." She paused. "But only if you want to. I won't force you into something you're not ready for." Harlan raised his hand, his scarred fingers brushing her cheek with aching gentleness. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I don't want you to leave come spring. I know that watching you with the children, seeing you fight for this place like it's yours, hearing you say you believe in me." He stopped, overwhelmed. "It makes me want to try, to be brave like you said, even if I'm terrified." "Then we'll be terrified together." Marion leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "And maybe if we're lucky, being terrified together will be less scary than being terrified alone." He almost smiled. "When did you become an optimist?" "When a stubborn cowboy saved my son's life twice and made me believe in miracles again." Harlan pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that spoke of years of isolation finally breaking. Marion held him back, feeling his heart hammer against her cheek, feeling her own heart answer in kind. They stood in the firelight, two broken people discovering that sometimes broken pieces fit together in unexpected ways. "We still have to deal with Thornwell," Harlan said eventually, his voice muffled against her hair. "Still have to survive that hearing and keep this land." "We will. Together." "You really believe that?" "I have to. The alternative is unacceptable." Marion pulled back enough to see his face. "We've survived winter storms and sick children and 8 years of grief. We can survive one land-grabbing neighbor with delusions of empire." But 3 days later, those delusions arrived at their doorstep with legal weight behind them. The same lawyer who delivered the original papers returned, this time with a sheriff's deputy and documents that made Harlan's face go white. "Elias Thornwell has petitioned for immediate seizure of disputed water rights pending the hearing," the lawyer announced, his voice professionally neutral. "As of today, you are prohibited from using water from the creek for any purpose. Violation will result in contempt charges and immediate forfeiture of your property claim." "That's impossible," Marion said before Harlan could respond. "How can he prohibit use of water before a judge has even heard the case?" "Emergency petition granted by Judge Alderson based on Thornwell's claim of prior rights." The lawyer handed over more papers. "I'm simply serving notice. You have until sunset to comply." They left, and Harlan sank into a chair, the papers clutched in shaking hands. "He's cutting off our water. Without water, the livestock will die. Without livestock, we have no income. He's not waiting for the hearing. He's trying to force me off the land before we even get to court." "Can he do that? Legally?" "Apparently he just did." Harlan's voice was hollow. "And Judge Alderson is Thornwell's second cousin. I should have known he'd stack the deck." Marion's mind raced, looking for angles, options, anything that could counter this move. "What about the other creek? The one on the western boundary?" "Too far. The cattle can't range that wide in winter snow. And hauling water for the horses and milk cows?" He shook his head. "It's not sustainable. He knows that. This is a killing blow, Marion. He's won." "No." The word came out sharp and absolute. "No, he hasn't won. Not yet. Not while we're still standing." "What are we supposed to do? We can't fight an emergency order. We can't access water we're legally prohibited from using. And we can't survive 6 more weeks until the hearing without water." Marion stared at the papers, her mind working furiously. Then something occurred to her. A detail from all their research, a small notation on one of the old property maps Harlan had shown her. "The disputed acres," she said slowly, "the ones along the creek where the water rights are being contested. What exactly is on that land?" "Nothing, just creek bank and a stand of cottonwoods. Why?" "Show me the map, the original survey from your father's claim." Harlan pulled out the map, spreading it on the table. Marion traced the property line, following it to where it met the creek. There, in faded ink, was a small notation she'd noticed before but hadn't thought significant. "What's this mark here? These crossed lines?" Harlan peered at the notation, then went very still. "That's a grave marker. My father's surveyor put it there to denote—" His voice caught. "My parents are buried there, on that disputed land. Their graves are unmarked because that's how they wanted it, but they're there, under the cottonwoods." "Then that land isn't just property, it's sacred ground. It's a family cemetery." Marion's eyes met his, fierce with sudden hope. "And there are laws protecting family cemeteries from seizure, aren't there, even in territorial disputes?" Understanding dawned on Harlan's face. "There are. Montana Territory Code explicitly protects burial grounds from property claims that would disturb them. If we can prove my parents are buried there, then Thornwell can't touch that land. And if he can't touch that land, he can't cut off your access to the creek. Marion grabbed his hands. This is it, Harlan. This is how we fight back. But proving they're buried there without disturbing the graves, Harlan's mind was already working through the problem. We'd need witnesses who were present at the burials, documentation, something concrete. Mrs. Halstead might remember. And Samuel Brooks kept records of everything. He might have notes about the burials. Marion was already pulling on her coat. We need to ride to Winter's Bluff. Now, before Thornwell realizes what we're doing. It's a full day's ride and the trails are still bad from the storm. Then we better leave immediately. She turned to where Tom and Elsie were watching with wide eyes. You two will stay here. Tom, you're in charge. Keep the fire going, don't go outside, and don't open the door for anyone except us. Understand? Mama, I don't want you to go, Elsie said, her voice small. Marion knelt, pulling her daughter close. I know, sweet girl, but sometimes you have to fight for what matters. And this place, this home, it matters. So we're going to fight for it. She kissed both children, gave them final instructions, and turned to find Harlan already saddling horses. His face was set with grim determination, but underneath it she saw something else. Hope. Fragile but growing. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, pushing the horses as fast as the snow-packed trails would allow. The journey was brutal, hours of cold and exhaustion and mounting desperation. But they reached Winter's Bluff by late afternoon, and Harlan went straight to Mrs. Halstead while Marion sought out Samuel Brooks. She found the old man in his small house on the edge of town, surrounded by ledgers and papers that chronicled decades of territorial history. When she explained what they needed, his eyes sharpened with interest. Creed's parents, yes, I remember, died within a year of each other. His father in a logging accident, his mother from fever the following spring. Would have been, he pulled out a ledger, flipping through yellowed pages. 1862 and 1863. Harlan was just a boy, couldn't have been more than 12 when his mother passed. Were their deaths recorded? The burial locations? Everything was recorded. I made sure of that. Brooks pulled out another ledger, older and more worn. Here. Thomas Creed, buried August 12, 1862, in family cemetery on his property, claim along Willow Creek. And Mercy Creed, buried April 3, 1863, beside her husband. I attended both funerals personally. There were maybe a dozen people present. Harlan, young Sarah Winters, who later became his wife, myself, Mrs. Halstead, and her husband, a few others from town. Would you testify to that in court? Brooks looked at her steadily. Elias Thornwell is trying to steal that boy's land, isn't he? Using legal trickery and money to take what belongs to a family that's worked that ground for 40 years. Yes. Then yes, Mrs. Creed, I'll testify, and I'll bring these records with me. Let's see Thornwell argue with documented history. Marion could have kissed him. Instead, she thanked him profusely and ran to find Harlan, who emerged from the boarding house with Mrs. Halstead at his side. She remembers, Harlan said, his voice tight with emotion. Everything. She remembers helping wash my mother's body for burial, remembers the cottonwood grove, remembers me reading from my father's Bible over their graves. Samuel Brooks has the official records. He'll testify too. Marion turned to Mrs. Halstead. Would you be willing to come to court to tell the judge what you remember? Willing? Mrs. Creed, I'd crawl over broken glass to help that boy keep his family's land. Mrs. Halstead's expression was fierce. Elias Thornwell is a bully and a cheat, and it's high time someone stood up to him. You count me in. They rode back to the ranch through darkness, exhausted but buoyed by something that felt dangerously like victory. Tom and Elsie were safe, the fire was still burning, and they had the evidence they needed to prove the contested land was protected by cemetery law. This could work, Harlan said as they unsaddled the horses in the barn. If the judge accepts the burial ground claim, Thornwell's whole case falls apart. He can't contest water rights on land he can't legally challenge. It's going to work, Marion corrected. We have witnesses, documentation, and truth on our side. That has to count for something. Harlan turned to her, hay dust in his hair and hope on his scarred face. You really believe that? That truth matters? I have to believe it. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? He pulled her close, his embrace fierce and desperate. I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I'm grateful for it. You know that, right? Grateful for you, for your stubborn refusal to give up, for the way you make me believe impossible things might be possible. Marion held him back, feeling the steady beat of his heart, feeling her own heart respond. We're going to win this, Harlan. We're going to keep this land, keep this home, and build the life we both deserve. I can feel it. And standing in the warm barn with snow falling outside and two children safe in the house, and a battle ahead that they would face together, Marion let herself believe her own words. They would win. They had to. Because the alternative, losing this place, this fragile family they were building, this man who'd finally learned to hope again, was simply unacceptable. The war for their home had just begun. But for the first time since receiving those legal papers, Marion felt like they might actually survive it. The confidence Marion felt in the barn lasted exactly 3 days, until Elias Thornwell himself arrived at their door. He came at midday, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion and flanked by two ranch hands who looked more like hired muscle than cowboys. Harlan saw them coming from the barn and moved to intercept them before they reached the house. But Marion was already stepping onto the porch, refusing to hide. Thornwell was everything she'd expected, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone who'd never done a day of hard labor in his life. His smile was practiced and cold, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Creed," he said, dismounting with the ease of someone accustomed to being catered to. "I thought it was time we spoke directly, man to man, without lawyers complicating things." "We have nothing to discuss," Harlan said, his voice flat. "You'll get my response in court." "Ah, yes. The emergency injunction. I heard you've been scrambling to find a loophole." Thornwell's eyes flicked to Marion, assessing her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "And you must be the new Mrs. Creed. How convenient that Harlan finally found himself a wife right when he needed character witnesses for a legal dispute." "My marriage has nothing to do with your illegal land grab," Marion said before Harlan could respond. "And if you came here to intimidate us, you're wasting your time." Thornwell laughed, genuinely amused. "Intimidate? Mrs. Creed, I don't need to intimidate anyone. I have the law on my side, superior water rights, and a judge who understands how progress works in Montana territory. Your husband is fighting a losing battle, and the sooner he accepts that, the better for everyone." "Better for you, you mean?" "Better for the valley. This land needs modern management, consolidated holdings, efficient use of resources." "Harlan here," Thornwell gestured dismissively. "He's holding on to the past with both hands, playing at being a frontier rancher when the frontier is already gone. It's almost sad." Harlan's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice remained controlled. "You done?" "Not quite. I came to make you an offer, Creed. A generous one, all things considered." Thornwell pulled a folded document from his coat. "I'll buy your property for fair market value. You can take the money, start fresh somewhere else, avoid the humiliation of being thrown off land your family's held for 40 years. It's more than you deserve, frankly, but I'm a reasonable man." "No. Don't be foolish. You can't win this fight. My lawyers have already filed a motion to dismiss your cemetery claim on the grounds that unmarked graves don't qualify for protection under territorial law. Without physical markers or a registered cemetery plat, you have nothing but hearsay and old men's memories. That won't stand up in court." Marion felt her stomach drop. She'd read the cemetery protection laws during their research, but she hadn't considered that unmarked graves might not qualify. If Thornwell's lawyers could convince the judge that without physical evidence, headstones, markers, documentation beyond testimony, the graves didn't legally exist, then their entire defense collapsed. Harlan must have had the same thought, because his face went pale beneath his tan, but he stood his ground. "The answer is still no. This land is mine. My family's blood and sweat is in every acre. I'm not selling to you or anyone else." Thornwell's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool, and you'll lose everything. The hearing is in 4 weeks. When the judge rules in my favor, you'll be evicted with nothing but the clothes on your back. Your wife, your children, they'll be homeless because of your stubborn pride. Is that really what you want?" What I want is for you to get off my property before I forget I'm trying to be civilized." For a moment, something dangerous flashed in Thornwell's eyes, a glimpse of the ruthless man beneath the polished exterior. Then he smiled again, cold and calculated. "Very well. I tried to be reasonable. Remember that when you're watching your family freeze in the streets of Winter's Bluff because you were too proud to take a good deal." He remounted his horse with practiced ease, his hired men following suit. As they turned to leave, Thornwell paused. "Oh, and Creed? I'd stop using water from the creek if I were you. My men have been documenting every time your cattle drink from it. Each violation is a separate contempt charge. Keep it up, and you'll be in jail before the hearing even happens." They rode away, and Marion watched Harlan's shoulders sag, as if Thornwell had physically beaten him. "He's right," Harlan said quietly, "about the unmarked graves. I never thought to put up markers because my parents wanted a simple burial, just the earth and the trees. But without physical proof, we'll find proof." Marion's mind was already racing. There has to be something. People who were there, records we haven't found yet. Something that proves those graves exist. "Marion, we've already talked to everyone who remembers. We have testimonies, but Thornwell's lawyers will tear them apart. Old people with faulty memories, second-hand accounts, convenient timing. They'll make it sound like we're making the whole thing up. Then we find physical proof. We go to those cottonwoods, and we look for evidence that burials took place there. Disturbed earth, settled ground patterns, something a surveyor or expert could testify about." Harlan looked at her like she'd suggested digging up the graves themselves. "I can't disturb their resting place. I won't. I'm not suggesting we dig them up. I'm suggesting we document that burials occurred there. Ground-penetrating surveys, soil analysis, something scientific that a judge can't dismiss as faulty memory." Marion grabbed his arms. "We're not giving up, not when we're this close." "Close to what? Losing anyway?" "Marion, maybe Thornwell's right. Maybe I should take his money and what? Run? Start over somewhere else? Teach Tom and Elsie that when bullies come you surrender?" Marion's voice rose with passion. "This is your home, Harlan. Your parents are buried here. Sarah is buried here. You've survived 8 years of grief in this valley. You're not abandoning it now because some rich man with lawyers thinks he can steal what's yours. What if I can't protect it? What if I fail again, like I failed Sarah, like I failed—" "Stop." Marion's hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You didn't fail Sarah. You didn't fail your parents or your brother or anyone else you've spent years punishing yourself for losing. And you're not going to fail now, because you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have the children. You have people in town who are willing to fight for you. So stop talking about surrender and start figuring out how we win." Harlan stared at her, something breaking open in his expression. "How are you so sure we can win?" "Because I have to be. Because giving up isn't an option. Because—" She stopped, the truth rising unbidden. "Because I love this place. I love the life we're building here. And I love—" The words caught in her throat, too big and terrifying to say aloud. But Harlan heard them anyway. She saw it in the way his breath hitched, the way his eyes went wide with shock, and something that looked like desperate hope. "Marion, don't make me say it out loud yet. I'm not ready." She stepped back, her heart hammering. "Just know that losing this place, it's not an option. So we fight. We find the proof we need, and we fight." Harlan nodded slowly, and Marion could see him gathering himself, pushing past fear and old wounds to find the strength she knew he possessed. "All right, we fight. But we're going to need help, real help. Someone who knows territorial law better than Thornwell's lawyers." "Where do we find someone like that out here?" "Helena, the territorial capital. There are lawyers there who specialize in property disputes, land rights, water law. If we could get one of them to take our case, that's 5 days' ride, in the best conditions. And we can't both go. Someone needs to stay with the children." Harlan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Samuel Brooks. He has contacts in Helena from his years running the assay office. If I sent him a telegram explaining our situation, he might know someone who'd take the case. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. Do it. Send the telegram today. Marion paused. "And Harlan? About what I almost said?" "I know. His scarred hand found hers, squeezing gently. And for what it's worth, He struggled with the words. 8 years of isolation fighting against feelings he'd sworn never to feel again. I'm not ready to say it either, but I feel it. God help me. I feel it too. The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Then Tom's voice called from inside the house, asking about lunch, and the moment dissolved into the practical demands of daily survival. But something had shifted. They both felt it. The careful distance they'd maintained, the walls they'd built to protect themselves, they were crumbling faster than either had anticipated, and whether that was terrifying or exhilarating, neither could say. The telegram went out that afternoon. Samuel Brooks promised to contact his associates in Helena and see if anyone would take a case this close to hearing with such limited time to prepare. The response came 3 days later, delivered by a writer who'd been paid handsomely to make the winter journey. Brooks appeared at their door just before sunset, his aged face creased with concern. I heard back from Helena. There's a lawyer there, Marcus Webb, who specializes in property and water rights disputes. He's won cases against men like Thornwell before, but what? Harlan demanded. He won't take a case he doesn't think he can win. He wants to see your evidence first, all of it. Documents, testimonies, surveys, everything you've gathered, and he wants it in Helena by the end of next week. That's impossible. I can't leave the ranch for that long, not with... I'll go. Marion's voice was steady, decided. I'll take the documents to Helena. I'll meet with this lawyer and convince him to take our case. Marion, no. It's too dangerous. 5 days through mountain passes in winter, alone. I won't be alone. Mr. Brooks will come with me, won't you? She turned to the old man with an expression that dared him to refuse. Brooks blinked, then smiled slowly. Well, I suppose I could use a trip to the capital. Been a few years since I've seen it. And my nephew runs a stable there. We'd have safe places to stay along the route. See? Not alone. Not unprepared. Marion turned back to Harlan. You need to stay here with the children. Tom's still recovering, and someone needs to manage the ranch. I can do this. I can convince this lawyer to help us. Harlan looked like he wanted to argue, to forbid her from taking such a risk. But he'd learned enough about Marion Doyle Creed to know that forbidding her anything was pointless. If you're determined to do this, I am. Then I'm going with you as far as Copper Ridge. It's a day's ride, and it'll put you on the main Helena Road, safer than the direct route through the high passes. The children. Mrs. Halstead can stay with them. Doat. I'll ride to town tonight and ask her. She's helped with children before. She'll manage for the day I'm gone. His jaw set stubbornly. This isn't negotiable, Marion. If you're risking your life for this land, the least I can do is see you safely to the main road. There was no point arguing with that tone. Marion nodded. All right, we leave in 2 days. That gives us time to organize everything the lawyer needs to see. Those 2 days passed in a frenzy of preparation. Marion copied documents until her hand cramped, organized testimonies into coherent narratives, created a presentation that would make their case impossible to ignore. Harlan taught her basic survival skills for winter travel, how to build an emergency shelter, how to start a fire in snow, how to read weather patterns. Mrs. Halstead arrived with enough supplies to feed an army and a fierce determination to protect the children as if they were her own. The morning of departure came too fast. Marion held Tom and Elsie close, breathing in their familiar scents, memorizing the feel of their arms around her neck. You're coming back, right, Mama? Elsie asked, her small voice trembling. Of course I am, sweet girl. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. I'll be back in 2 weeks, maybe less. Marion kissed her daughter's forehead. You be good for Mrs. Halstead, and Tom, you take care of your sister. I will. Tom's thin arms squeezed tight. Bring back a good lawyer, Mama, one who can beat Mr. Thornwell. That's the plan. The ride to Copper Ridge was grueling but uneventful. Harlan rode beside her in silence for most of the journey, his presence both comforting and complicated. They stopped to rest the horses at midday, and Harlan pulled her aside while Brooks tended to the animals. There's something I need to say before you go. Harlan's scarred face was serious, his blue-gray eyes intense. If something happens to you out there, if you get hurt or lost or... nothing's going to happen. But if it does... I need you to know that these months with you and the children, they've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, purpose, a reason to keep fighting. He took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle. So you come back, Marion. You hear me? You fight through whatever comes, and you come back to us, to me. Harlan, I know we're not ready to say the words. I know we're both scared of what this is becoming, but I'm saying them anyway because you need to hear them before you ride off into the mountains. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I love you. I fought it, denied it, tried to convince myself it was just gratitude or convenience or anything else. But it's love, and I need you to come back so I can figure out how to be the man who deserves that. Marion's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. You stubborn, impossible man. You weren't supposed to say it first. Someone had to. Might as well be the coward who spent 8 years running from feelings. She laughed, the sound breaking on a sob. I love you too. I tried not to, tried to keep it practical and safe. But you saved my son's life. You gave us a home. You let me see past your walls to the good man underneath. How was I supposed to not fall in love with that? Harlan kissed her then, gentle and desperate and full of promises neither was sure they could keep. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, the Montana cold forgotten in the warmth they'd created. 2 weeks, Marion whispered. I'll be back in 2 weeks with a lawyer who can save our home. I'll be waiting, and Marion, be careful, please. Always. The ride to Helena tested every ounce of Marion's strength and determination. The mountain passes were treacherous with ice and snow. Twice they had to detour around avalanche debris. One night they sheltered in an abandoned mining camp while a storm raged outside, and Marion wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But Samuel Brooks proved to be a steady companion, full of stories and practical knowledge that kept her spirits up. And the thought of Harlan waiting, of the children depending on her, of the home they were fighting for, it drove her forward when exhaustion threatened to pull her down. They reached Helena on the 7th day, both frozen and exhausted but triumphant. The territorial capital was a bustling city compared to Winter's Bluff, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. Brooks led her to a respectable boarding house run by a friend, where she could rest and clean up before meeting Marcus Webb. The lawyer's office was impressive, 2 floors above a bank, with mahogany furniture and law books lining every wall. Webb himself was younger than Marion expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an intensity that reminded her of a hunting hawk. Mrs. Creed. He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk. Samuel's telegram was intriguing. He says you're facing down Elias Thornwell in a water rights dispute. That's correct. Marion set her carefully organized documents on his desk. Mr. Thornwell is attempting to seize land my husband's family has held for 40 years, claiming superior water rights that don't exist. We have evidence proving his claim is fraudulent, but we need someone who can present that evidence effectively in court. Webb opened the documents, his expression neutral as he read. Marion watched him, trying to gauge his reactions, but the man was impossible to read. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, he looked up. Your documentation is thorough. The testimony from Brooks and Mrs. Halstead is compelling. The cemetery claim is clever. If you can prove those graves exist. He paused. But Thornwell's lawyers are right about one thing. Unmarked graves are difficult to defend legally. Without physical markers or a registered cemetery plat, testimony alone may not be sufficient. Marion's heart sank. So you won't take the case? I didn't say that. Webb leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I said testimony alone might not be sufficient, but there are other avenues we can pursue. Ground surveys, soil analysis, historical records beyond what you've already gathered. And if Thornwell is as corrupt as Samuel suggests, there may be irregularities in his own documentation that we can exploit. Does that mean? It means I'll take your case, Mrs. Creed, on one condition. His eyes were sharp. I don't lose. Ever. So if I'm going to fight Elias Thornwell, I need your complete honesty. No surprises, no hidden facts that will surface in court and destroy our credibility. Can you give me that? Yes, absolutely. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Webb pulled out fresh paper and began making notes. First, I'm sending a surveyor to your property immediately to document ground disturbances consistent with burial sites. Second, I'm filing motions to compel Thornwell to produce his original documentation, not copies, originals. If there's been any forgery or backdating, we'll find it. Third, I'm requesting a change of venue based on Judge Alderson's family relationship to Thornwell. That's a clear conflict of interest. Can you do all that before the hearing? The hearing is in 3 weeks. That's tight, but not impossible. Webb's smile was predatory. I've won cases with less time and worse odds. Thornwell may have money and connections, but he's gotten sloppy. Men like him always do. They think they're untouchable. We're going to prove him wrong. Hope flared in Marion's chest, bright and fierce. When can you come to Winter's Bluff? I'll leave the day after tomorrow. That gives me time to file the preliminary motions and hire the surveyor. Meet me at the boarding house in Winter's Bluff on... He consulted a calendar. March 8th. We'll have 1 week to prepare before the hearing. Can you and your husband be ready? We'll be ready. Then we have a deal, Mrs. Creed. Webb stood, extending his hand. I'll see you in 3 weeks. And Mrs. Creed, tell your husband not to worry. We're going to bury Elias Thornwell in his own greed. The return journey felt faster, buoyed by hope and the knowledge that they finally had a real chance. Marion pushed hard, eager to get home, to tell Harlan the good news to see her children again. Brooks protested her pace but kept up gamely, sensing her urgency. They made it back to the ranch in 6 days instead of 7, arriving just as the sun was setting on a clear, cold evening. Harlan must have been watching for them, because he was running from the barn before Marion had even dismounted, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that spoke of how worried he'd been. You're back. Thank God you're back. He held her like he'd feared he'd never see her again. The children have been asking for you every day. I've been... He didn't finish, just held her tighter. I'm fine. We're fine. And Harlan, we got him. Marcus Webb. He's taking our case. He's confident we can win. Harlan pulled back, searching her face to see if she was serious. He really thinks we have a chance? Better than a chance. He's filing motions, sending surveyors, tearing apart Thornwell's documentation. He said we're going to bury Thornwell in his own greed. Marion couldn't stop smiling. We're going to win this, Harlan. I can feel it. Mama! Tom and Elsie came tumbling out of the house, Mrs. Halstead behind them with a knowing smile. The children crashed into Marion with enough force to nearly knock her over, both talking at once about everything that had happened while she was gone. Marion held them close, breathing in the scent of home and wood smoke and safety. Over their heads, she met Harlan's eyes and saw everything she felt reflected back: love, hope, determination, and the fierce conviction that they would fight for this life they were building and they would win. The final 3 weeks before the hearing were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus Webb arrived with his surveyor, a thin man named Peterson, who spent 2 days examining the cottonwood grove with instruments Marion didn't understand. When he finished, his report was definitive. There were 2 distinct ground disturbances consistent with human burials, both approximately 20 years old based on soil settlement patterns and root growth around the sites. This is gold, Webb said, reviewing the report with barely contained satisfaction. Physical evidence that stands up to scientific scrutiny. Thornwell's lawyers can dismiss testimony, but they can't dismiss soil science. He'd also found irregularities in Thornwell's documentation. The papers claiming his father had filed for water rights before Harlan's father contained dates that didn't match territorial filing records. Someone had altered them, probably years ago, assuming no one would ever check. He's been planning this for a long time, Webb explained. Probably since his father died and he inherited the adjoining property. He's been slowly building a false paper trail, counting on time and missing records to cover his tracks. But he made mistakes, and we're going to make him pay for every single one. The night before the hearing, Marion and Harlan sat up late going over their testimony, making sure every detail was perfect. The children were asleep, Mrs. Halstead had returned to town, and the house was quiet except for the crackling fire. Whatever happens tomorrow, Harlan said softly, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done, for fighting when I wanted to give up, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. We fight together, remember? That's what families do. Marion took his hand, lacing their fingers together. And tomorrow, we're going to stand in that courtroom and we're going to prove that this land is ours. that our home is worth fighting for, that Elias Thornwell can't buy everything with money and corruption. And if we lose, we won't. But if we did, Marion paused, thinking, then we'd figure something else out, together, because that's what we do now. We face things together. Harlan pulled her close, and they sat in the firelight holding each other, drawing strength from their connection, from the love they'd found in the most unexpected circumstances. Tomorrow would bring the fight of their lives, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. The courtroom in Winter's Bluff was packed. It seemed like half the valley had turned out to watch the showdown between Elias Thornwell and Harlan Creed. Marion sat in the front row with Tom and Elsie, who'd insisted on coming despite her misgivings. Harlan sat at the defendant's table with Marcus Webb, his scarred face composed, but his hands clenched tight. Thornwell sat across from them, flanked by 3 expensive lawyers from Helena, looking supremely confident. Judge Morrison, the replacement Judge Webb's venue change motion had secured, was an older man with a reputation for fairness and a deep knowledge of territorial law. The proceedings began with Thornwell's lawyers presenting their case. They spoke eloquently about prior appropriation, about the need for efficient water management, about property rights and legal precedent. They produced their documents, which looked impressive until Webb began his cross-examination. Mr. Cartwright, Webb addressed Thornwell's lead lawyer, can you tell the court the date on this filing claim? June 15th, 1844, as clearly stated. And can you explain why the Territorial Filing Office has no record of any claims being filed in June of 1844? In fact, their records show the filing office wasn't even established until September of that year. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cartwright's confidence flickered. That must be a clerical error, or it's evidence that this document has been backdated, forged to support a fraudulent claim. Webb produced his own documents. I have here the actual territorial records showing Thomas Creed's claim, properly filed in September 1845. There is no corresponding claim from Thornwell's father. None, which means your entire case is built on forgery. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for order while Thornwell's lawyers scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. Webb had proven their documentation was false, and everything that followed crumbled under scrutiny. Then came the cemetery claim. Webb called Samuel Brooks to the stand, who testified clearly and confidently about the burials he'd witnessed. Mrs. Halstead followed, her testimony bringing tears to several spectators' eyes as she described helping prepare Mercy Creed's body for burial, watching young Harlan read scripture over his mother's grave. Finally, Peterson the surveyor presented his scientific findings, complete with diagrams and measurements that proved beyond doubt that 2 graves existed on the disputed land. Your Honor, Webb concluded, this land contains a family cemetery. Under Montana territorial law, such land is protected from seizure or dispute regardless of other property claims. Mr. Thornwell has no legal right to contest water access through land that contains the protected burial sites of Mr. Creed's parents. His entire case collapses under the weight of his own fraud. Judge Morrison reviewed the evidence carefully, his expression grave. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I've heard enough. Mr. Thornwell's claim is denied on multiple grounds. First, the documentation supporting his water rights claim appears to be fraudulent, and I'm referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal investigation. Second, the cemetery claim is valid and supported by both testimony and scientific evidence. That land is protected under territorial law. Third, I'm imposing sanctions on Mr. Thornwell and his legal team for bringing a case built on fraudulent documentation. Mr. Creed's water rights are hereby affirmed and protected. The gavel came down like thunder, and the courtroom exploded in sound. Marion found herself on her feet, tears streaming down her face, pulling Tom and Elsie into a fierce embrace. Harlan turned to look at her, his expression stunned, and then he was moving, crossing the courtroom to pull all 3 of them into his arms. We won, Marion whispered against his chest. Harlan, we won. You won, he corrected. You fought for this. You believed when I couldn't. This victory is yours. No, it's ours. All of ours. She pulled back to look at his face, at the joy and relief and love written there. We did this together, as a family. Around them, people were cheering, congratulating, celebrating. Mrs. Halstead was crying happy tears. Samuel Brooks was shaking Webb's hand and laughing. Even Thornwell's supporters seemed impressed by the dramatic reversal. Thornwell himself had fled the courtroom the moment the judge's ruling came down, his expensive lawyers scrambling after him. Marian caught a glimpse of his face as he left, pale, furious, defeated. She felt no sympathy. Men like him had been taking advantage of good people for too long. Today, justice had actually prevailed. That evening, half the valley descended on the Creed Ranch to celebrate. Someone brought a fiddle. Mrs. Halstead brought more food than 20 people could eat. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to stand up to Thornwell before came forward now, offering congratulations and support and promises of help if it was ever needed. Harlan stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed and clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but Marian could see him slowly relaxing, slowly accepting that he was part of a community again, that he didn't have to face the world alone. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the children had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion, Marian found Harlan on the porch, staring out at the dark valley. "You all right?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. "I keep thinking about what Thornwell said, about me holding on to the past, refusing to move forward." Harlan's voice was thoughtful. He was right, in a way. "I have been stuck, clinging to grief and isolation because it felt safer than risking loss again. And now? Now I want to build something new, not forget the past, but stop letting it define everything." He turned to her, his scarred face illuminated by lamplight from inside. "I want to build a life with you, Marian. A real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. A real family with you and Tom and Elsie. I want to fill this house with noise and chaos and all the things I thought I'd lost forever." Marian's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. "Are you sure? No more running? No more walls? I'm terrified, but I'm sure." He took her hands, his grip strong and certain. "You taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the hard thing anyway. So I'm being brave. I'm choosing hope over fear. I'm choosing you. Then I choose you too, not out of desperation this time, but out of love. Real, honest, forever love." Marian raised up on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture: gratitude, passion, promise, hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, and Harlan was smiling, truly smiling, in a way she'd never seen before. It transformed his face, erasing years and scars and making him look young and hopeful and completely, impossibly beautiful. "Come spring," he said, "I want to put up headstones for my parents, proper markers with their names and dates. And I want to plant Sarah's favorite flowers around her grave. Honor the past properly instead of hiding from it." "That sounds perfect." "And I want to expand the house, build that addition I planned years ago, make room for the family we're going to be." He paused. "That is, if you want more children. I know you've got Tom and Elsie already, and I wouldn't presume—" "Harlan." Marian placed her finger on his lips, stopping the nervous rambling. "I would love to have children with you, to build the family you dreamed of, to fill this valley with little Creeds who have your stubborn determination and your good heart." He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promises for a future they would build together. And standing on the porch of the home they'd fought so hard to keep, Marian felt a peace she hadn't known since before James died. She'd found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. Not just safety or shelter or survival, but home. Real, true home, built on love and courage, and the willingness to keep fighting even when the odds seemed impossible. The cowboy who'd refused every woman in the county had finally opened his heart. And the desperate widow who'd asked the right question at exactly the right moment had found a love worth every risk she'd taken to reach it. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they were unstoppable. Winter began to loosen its grip on the valley in the days following their courthouse victory. The change was subtle at first. The sun lingering a few minutes longer each evening, the snow developing a crystalline crust that sparkled like diamonds, the sound of water beginning to move beneath the ice on the creek. Marian noticed it all with a keen awareness she'd never possessed before, as if winning the right to stay had awakened her senses to every detail of the land they'd fought for. The morning after the celebration, Harlan woke her before dawn with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Come with me," he whispered. "There's something I want to show you." Marian dressed quickly, wrapping herself in the warmest coat she owned, and followed him outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The world was hushed and expectant, holding its breath between night and day. Harlan led her past the barn, past the corrals where the horses stirred sleepily, and up a gentle slope to a spot where the pines gave way to open meadow. "Wait here," he said softly, positioning her to face east. They stood in silence as the sky began to lighten, turning from black to deep purple to rose gold. And then the sun crested the mountain ridge, spilling light across the valley in a wave that transformed everything it touched. Snow turned to liquid gold. Ice crystals caught fire. The mountains themselves seemed to glow from within, majestic and eternal and absolutely breathtaking. "This is what I see every morning," Harlan said quietly, his arm slipping around her waist. "What I've been seeing alone for 8 years. I wanted you to understand why I couldn't give this up, why I had to fight." Marian leaned against him, overwhelmed by the beauty and the intimacy of the moment. "It's extraordinary. Sarah loved this view. She used to wake me up just to watch the sunrise. Said it was God's way of reminding us that every day was a gift." His voice was soft with memory, but without the sharp edge of pain that used to accompany any mention of his late wife. "I stopped watching after she died. Couldn't bear the beauty of it when she wasn't here to share it. But now—" He tightened his arm around Marian. "Now I want to watch it again. With you. Every morning we're given." Marian turned in his embrace, her hands framing his scarred face. "She would have liked that, I think. Would have wanted you to keep living, keep finding joy, keep sharing beauty with someone who loves you." "You think so?" "I know so. Because that's what people who love you want. For you to be happy, even after they're gone." She stood on her toes to kiss him gently. "And I do love you," Harlan creed. "More than I thought possible when I walked up to you in Winter's Bluff with my desperate question. Best question anyone ever asked me." He kissed her back, deeper this time, and they stood wrapped in each other as the sun climbed higher and the valley woke around them. When they returned to the house, they found Tom and Elsie already awake and rummaging through the kitchen for breakfast. The children had changed in the months since their arrival. Tom had gained weight, his cheeks no longer hollow, his cough completely gone. Elsie had lost the fearful wariness that had shadowed her eyes, replaced by the natural exuberance of a child who felt safe and loved. "Where did you go?" Elsie demanded, climbing onto a chair with her usual energy. "We woke up and you were both gone." "Watching the sunrise," Marian said, moving to start breakfast. "Your father wanted to show me something beautiful." "Can we watch tomorrow?" Tom asked hopefully. "I've seen it from my window, but I bet it's better from wherever you were." Harlan ruffled his hair affectionately, the gesture coming more naturally now than it would have weeks ago. "Tomorrow it is. We'll make it a family tradition. First day of every month, we watch the sun come up together." "That's a good tradition," Tom said seriously. "Families should have traditions." Later that morning, after breakfast and chores, Harlan found Marian in what had become her favorite spot, the rocking chair by the big window that looked out over the valley. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle moving with practiced efficiency. "I've been thinking," he said, settling onto the arm of the chair, "about what I said last night, about expanding the house, building that addition." "Having second thoughts?" "The opposite. I want to start as soon as the ground thaws enough to dig foundations. But I want your input on the design. It should be a home that suits all of us, not just my old plans." Marian set down her mending, pleasure warming her from the inside. "What were you thinking?" "2 more bedrooms, one for Tom as he gets older and needs his own space, one for Elsie. A proper parlor where you can entertain if we have guests. Maybe a library, small but functional, where the children can do lessons and we can keep books." He paused, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. "And eventually, a nursery. When, we're blessed with more children." "That sounds perfect. But Harlan, can we afford all that? The legal fees alone must have—" Marcus Webb refused payment, said watching Thornwell's face when the judge ruled against him was compensation enough. Harlan's smile was genuine and unguarded. And I've got savings I've been accumulating for years with nothing to spend them on. Might as well use them to build something that matters. They spent the afternoon sketching rough plans, Harlan's practical knowledge of construction combining with Marion's eye for domestic comfort. Tom contributed ideas about where windows should go to catch the best light. Elsie insisted on a window seat in her future room where she could read and watch the mountains. It's going to be beautiful, Marion said as they looked at their collaborative design. A real family home. It already is, Harlan said quietly. The expansion will just make official what's already true. The following weeks brought the tentative arrival of spring. The snow began its retreat, revealing brown earth that would soon turn green. The creek swelled with meltwater, running loud and vigorous through the property that was now legally and permanently theirs. Birds returned from wherever they'd spent the winter, filling the mornings with song. And true to his word, Harlan began the process of honoring the dead he'd spent so long trying to forget. He enlisted Samuel Brooks to help design proper headstones for his parents. Simple granite markers with their names, dates, and an epitaph Harlan had struggled over for days before settling on. They built a life in wilderness and raised a son who carried their courage forward. It's perfect, Marion assured him when he showed her the final design. They would be proud of you, Harlan, of the man you've become, of the life you've built, of the way you fought for their legacy. The markers were installed on the first truly warm day of spring when the cottonwoods were beginning to show the faintest hint of green. Reverend Matthews came from Winter's Bluff to perform a belated blessing. Mrs. Halstead attended along with Samuel Brooks and a handful of neighbors who'd known Thomas and Mercy Creed in life. Harlan stood before his parents' graves with Marion beside him. Tom and Elsie pressed close and spoke words he'd needed to say for 20 years. I'm sorry it took me so long to do this properly. Sorry I let grief and fear keep me from honoring you the way you deserved. His voice was rough but steady. But I'm here now, and I'm not alone anymore. I found what you always wanted for me. A family, a purpose, a reason to keep building instead of just surviving. He paused, his hand finding Marion's. I hope you're at peace. I hope you know your sacrifice meant something. This land you claimed, this home you built, it's still here. Still ours, and I promise to take care of it the way you taught me. Marion squeezed his hand, her own eyes damp. Beside them, Tom stood straight and solemn, understanding the gravity of the moment, even if he couldn't fully comprehend its emotional weight. Elsie held a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd insisted on picking, which she placed gently at the base of Mercy's headstone. For the grandmother I never met, she whispered. Thank you for raising a papa who saves people. The simple gesture broke something open in Harlan. He knelt and pulled Elsie into his arms, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. Thank you, little one. That was perfect. After the ceremony, they walked to Sarah's grave on the far side of the property, where a simple wooden cross had marked her resting place for 8 years. Harlan had commissioned a proper headstone for her as well, and it would be installed the following week. For now, he stood before the cross with Marion at his side and did something he'd never been able to do before. He said goodbye. I'll always love you, Sarah. You'll always be part of who I am. But I'm ready to live again, fully and completely, with the woman who brought me back from the edge. He glanced at Marion, his eyes clear despite the tears. I think you'd like her. I think you'd approve of the life we're building. And I think you'd want me to be happy, the way I'd want you to be if our situations were reversed. Marion placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. She felt no jealousy of this woman who'd loved Harlan first, who'd shaped him and lost him, and left a scar deeper than the one on his face. Instead, she felt gratitude. For Sarah's love that had shown Harlan what marriage could be, for the grief that had taught him the value of what he'd lost, for the memory that made him determined never to take Marion's presence for granted. I'll take care of him, Marion said softly to the grave, to the memory, to whatever remained of the woman who'd been here first. I'll love him and stand beside him and remind him every day that he's worthy of happiness. I promise you that. The spring work began in earnest after that, consuming their days with purposeful labor. Harlan hired 2 ranch hands, young men from Winter's Bluff looking for honest work, to help with the expansion and the increased livestock he planned to purchase. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air as the addition began to take shape. Marian established a garden, turning over soil that hadn't been cultivated in years, planting vegetables and herbs and the flower seeds Mrs. Halstead had given her. Tom helped enthusiastically, his thin arms growing stronger with use. Elsie appointed herself in charge of the flowers, watering them daily and talking to them as if they could hear. "Mama says talking to plants helps them grow," she explained when Harlan questioned the practice. "And I've got lots to tell them." "I'm sure you do, little one." Harlan's affection for the children had deepened from protective tolerance to genuine love, and he no longer tried to hide it. He taught Tom to ride properly, spent hours carving elaborate animals for Elsie's growing collection, and listened with apparent interest to their endless observations about the world. One evening in late April, Marian found him reading to both children before bed, his deep voice bringing to life a story about knights and dragons. She stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching the three of them curled together on Tom's bed, and felt her heart swell with a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, not just safety or survival, but belonging. A place where she was needed and cherished, where her children could grow up strong and confident, where every day brought not just endurance but joy. Harlan looked up and caught her watching, his scarred face softening into a smile meant only for her. "Join us?" he mouthed. She did, settling on the other side of the bed, and they finished the story together as a family, their voices blending in the lamplight, while outside the spring darkness wrapped around their home like a protective embrace. The news reached them in early May, delivered by a rider from Winter's Bluff who'd been paid to make the journey quickly. Elias Thornwell had been arrested. The territorial prosecutor, following up on Judge Morrison's referral, had uncovered not just the forged water rights documents, but evidence of numerous other fraudulent land claims, bribes to officials, and schemes to force small ranchers off their properties. "He's facing 20 years in prison," the writer reported, accepting coffee from Marian. "Maybe more, depending on what else they find." Turns out he's been running this operation for decades, using lawyers and fake documents to steal land all across Montana territory. "Your case broke it wide open, Mr. Creed. You should be proud." After the writer left, Harlan sat at the kitchen table, processing the information. 20 years, he said quietly. "Part of me feels like I should be happy about that. Vindicated." "But you're not?" "I'm relieved. Justice was served and he can't hurt anyone else. But happy?" He shook his head. The man destroyed himself with his own greed. That's just sad, when you think about it. All that money and power, and it wasn't enough. He had to keep taking, keep controlling, until it consumed him. Marian recognized the growth in those words. The Harlan who'd first agreed to shelter them would have celebrated Thornwell's downfall without mercy. This Harlan, the man who'd learned to open his heart again, could see the tragedy even in the fall of an enemy. "You're a good man," she said, moving behind his chair to wrap her arms around his shoulders. "A better man than you give yourself credit for." He covered her hands with his, leaning back against her. "I'm trying to be. For you, for the children, for myself, finally." The addition was completed in late June, just as summer settled over the valley in full. The house had doubled in size, boasting the bedrooms they'd planned, a cozy parlor with windows facing the mountains, and a small library already filling with books ordered from Helena. The nursery remained empty for now, but it waited with patient promise for the children they hoped would eventually fill it. They held a proper housewarming, inviting everyone who'd stood by them during the legal battle and the neighbors who'd been too afraid of Thornwell to show support before. The house overflowed with people, food, laughter, and music. Harlan moved through his own home with visible discomfort at first. 8 years of isolation didn't disappear overnight. But Marian watched him slowly relax, slowly accept that this was what community felt like. "You've changed him," Mrs. Halstead said, finding Marian in a rare quiet moment. "That boy was half dead when you arrived, just going through the motions of living. Now look at him, laughing with neighbors, planning for the future, letting himself hope again. That's your doing." "He was ready to change. I just gave him a reason." Marian watched Harlan demonstrate some woodworking technique to a group of fascinated men. "And he saved us just as much as we saved him, maybe more. That's how the best marriages work. You save each other over and over, in all the small ways that matter. Mrs. Halstead patted her hand. I'm glad you found each other. Glad you had the courage to ask that question in the street that day. Took guts to approach Harlan Creed when everyone else had given up on him. I didn't have a choice. It was ask or watch my son die. You always have a choice, dear. You chose to fight, chose to believe, chose to see the man beneath the scars. That's courage, however you dress it up. Late that night, after the last guests had departed and the children had collapsed into exhausted sleep, Marian and Harlan stood on their new porch, looking out at the valley bathed in moonlight. This is everything I dreamed of once, Harlan said softly. Before Sarah died. A full house, good neighbors, a thriving ranch, children's laughter echoing through the rooms. I thought I'd lost it forever, but you gave it back to me. We built it together. And Harlan, Marian took a breath, gathering courage for what she needed to say. I think we're going to need that nursery sooner than expected. He went very still. Marian, are you saying I'm pregnant, about 2 months along, if I'm calculating correctly? She watched his face, unable to read his expression in the moonlight. I know we haven't talked about timing, and maybe it's too soon, but Harlan pulled her into his arms so fiercely she gasped. Too soon? Marian, it's perfect. You're perfect. This is... His voice broke. I get a second chance, at fatherhood, at building the family I lost, at everything, and this time I'm not taking a single moment for granted. You're happy then? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to cradle her face in his scarred hands. I'm terrified and grateful and so full of love I don't know how to contain it all. You've given me everything, Marian, everything I thought was dead and buried. She kissed him then, pouring all her own hope and joy and love into the gesture. Around them the valley stretched vast and beautiful, and theirs, earned through courage and perseverance and the willingness to risk everything for what mattered most. The summer passed in a haze of contentment and hard work. The ranch thrived under Harlan's expanded management. The garden produced abundantly, Marian's careful tending resulting in vegetables that fed them through the season and would stock their cellar for winter. Tom grew tall and strong, learning ranching skills from Harlan and academic lessons from Marian in the new library. Elsie's collection of carved animals reached impressive proportions, and she'd begun trying to carve her own. Her small tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked. Marian's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body adapting to the changes with resilience born of good food, regular rest, and the absence of the stress that had defined her first 2 pregnancies. Harlan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, and they had more than one argument about what she should or shouldn't be doing. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she said exasperatedly after he'd forbidden her from lifting a basket of washing. I managed perfectly well with Tom and Elsie without someone hovering over me. And you were exhausted and stressed and doing everything alone, Harlan countered. Now you have help. Let me help, Marian. Please. I need to feel like I'm doing something useful. She softened at that, understanding that his protectiveness came from fear of loss, from the memory of Sarah's death, from the desperate need to control what he could. All right, but you have to trust that I'll tell you if something's wrong. I'm not going to endanger this baby or myself through stubbornness. I promise. They compromised, as they'd learned to do on many things. Harlan channeled his protective energy into preparing for the baby's arrival, repairing the cradle that had been in storage since his brother's death, commissioning soft blankets and tiny clothes from the women in Winter's Bluff, reading every book on childbirth and infant care he could get his hands on. You know more about delivering babies than I do now, Marian teased, finding him hunched over a medical text one evening. Should I be concerned? I'm not taking any chances. If the midwife can't make it, if something goes wrong... He couldn't finish the thought. Marian moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Nothing is going to go wrong. We've arranged for the midwife to stay here the last 2 weeks before the baby's due. We have medical supplies, we have knowledge, and we have each other. That's enough, Harlan. It has to be enough because we can't control everything. I know. Doesn't stop me from trying. But he closed the book and pulled her into his lap, his hands gentle on her swelling belly. Have I told you today how much I love you? Twice, but I'm happy to hear it again. I love you, Marian Creed. I love your strength, and your courage and your stubborn refusal to give up on impossible causes like me. I love the way you've made this house a home, the way you love our children, the way you're growing our baby with such grace and courage. I love every single thing about you." Marion's eyes filled with tears, hormones, and emotion combining into a potent mix. "I love you too. Love the man you were brave enough to become. Love the father you are to Tom and Elsie. Love the future we're building together." They sat together in the lamplight, his hands cradling their unborn child, and everything felt exactly as it should be. The baby came on a crisp October morning, arriving with the efficiency that seemed to characterize all of Marion's endeavors. The midwife, Mrs. Patterson, had been staying at the ranch for a week, and when Marion's labor began just after dawn, everything proceeded smoothly. Harlan paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, Tom and Elsie watching him with wide eyes from their positions at the kitchen table where Mrs. Halstead was attempting to distract them with breakfast. "Is Mama going to be all right?" Elsie asked for the 10th time. "She's going to be fine," Mrs. Halstead assured her. "Women have babies all the time, sweetheart. Your mama is strong and healthy, and Mrs. Patterson is the best midwife in the territory." "Then why does Papa look so scared?" That was harder to answer. Mrs. Halstead settled for, "Sometimes people we love go through hard things, and all we can do is wait and worry. It's normal." The waiting seemed endless. Harlan wore a path in the floor, his face gray with fear despite Mrs. Patterson's periodic reports that everything was progressing normally. He'd lived this nightmare before, had held his dying wife while their baby struggled and failed to be born. Every sound from the bedroom made him flinch, expecting the worst. When the baby's cry finally rang out, strong and indignant, Harlan actually staggered. Mrs. Halstead caught his arm, her own eyes damp with sympathetic tears. "That's a good, healthy cry, Harlan. Your baby's here." Mrs. Patterson emerged moments later, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Creed, you have a daughter. Strong lungs, perfect fingers and toes, and your wife is doing beautifully. You can come in now." Harlan moved like a man in a dream, crossing to the bedroom where Marion lay propped against pillows, sweaty and exhausted and holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, her smile radiant. "Come meet your daughter." He approached slowly as if sudden movement might shatter the moment. When he looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blankets, something in his chest cracked wide open. She was perfect, impossibly small, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same blue-gray as his. She studied him with the serious intensity of the newborn, and Harlan felt tears streaming down his face unchecked. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect." "She is. And she's healthy, and I'm healthy, and everything turned out exactly as it should." Marion shifted to make room for him on the bed. "Come hold her, Papa." With infinite care, Harlan took his daughter into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird, and he held her like she was made of spun glass. "Hi there, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa. I'm going to love you and protect you and make sure you never doubt for a second how wanted you are." The baby made a small sound, her tiny hand escaping the blankets to wave aimlessly. Harlan offered his finger, and she gripped it with surprising strength, holding on as if she already understood this was her father and he would keep her safe. "What should we name her?" Marion asked softly. They'd discussed names for months, unable to settle on one that felt right. But looking at his daughter, Harlan suddenly knew. Hope. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents, a second chance, a new beginning, proof that life can bloom even after the hardest winters. Marion's eyes filled with tears. "Hope, Creed, it's perfect." Tom and Elsie were allowed in shortly after, their faces awed as they peered at their new sister. Elsie immediately declared herself Hope's protector and best friend. Tom, trying to appear mature and unaffected, couldn't hide his smile when the baby gripped his finger the way she'd gripped Harlan's. "She's really small," he observed. "Are all babies this small?" "You were," Marion assured him, "and you grew into the strong young man I see before me. Hope will grow too, and she'll have the best big brother and sister to watch over her." Over the following weeks, the ranch settled into new rhythms built around Hope's needs. She was a relatively easy baby, nursing well and sleeping in predictable stretches that allowed Marion to recover her strength. Harlan was besotted, spending every free moment holding his daughter, talking to her in soft tones, marveling at her tiny perfections. "You're going to spoil her," Marion warned, watching him rock Hope by the fire one evening. "Absolutely. That's my right as her father." He looked up with a grin. "Besides, Tom and Elsie turned out fine, and you spoiled them plenty. I provided appropriate affection and discipline in balanced measure." "That's what you want to call it." He returned his attention to Hope, his voice dropping to that special tone reserved only for her. "Your mama is going to try to make you sensible and practical, little Hope, but your papa is going to teach you to chase butterflies and climb trees and believe in impossible things. We'll balance each other out." Watching them together, Marion felt a contentment so complete it was almost frightening. She'd learned not to trust happiness, had spent too many years waiting for disaster to strike. But this, her husband holding their daughter while her other children played quietly nearby, the house warm and full of life, the ranch thriving around them, this felt solid in a way nothing had since James died. "You're thinking too much again," Harlan said, reading her expression with the accuracy of someone who'd learned to see past her defenses. "I can practically hear your brain working from here. Just appreciating this. All of it. Trying to memorize what happiness feels like so I can hold on to it when things get hard again." "Things will get hard again," Harlan agreed. "That's life on a ranch in Montana. Hard winters, drought, difficult calvings, money troubles, all of it. But Marion," he met her eyes over Hope's downy head, "we'll face it together. That's what makes it bearable. Not facing it alone. No more winters alone for either of us." "No more winters alone," he agreed. "Just family and love and fighting through whatever comes, because the alternative, giving up, running away, hiding from life, that's not living at all." Christmas came with deep snow and temperatures that would have terrified Marion a year ago. Now, safe in their expanded home with a full cellar and adequate firewood, the winter felt almost cozy. They decorated with pine boughs and berries, hung stockings for all 5 of them, and Harlan surprised everyone by producing gifts he'd been secretly commissioning for months. For Tom, a proper saddle size to fit him, marking his transition from child to young man learning to manage the ranch. For Elsie, a beautiful set of carving tools with her name engraved on the handles. For Marion, a rocking chair he'd crafted himself during late nights in the barn, its wood polished to a warm glow and sized perfectly for nursing Hope. "When did you have time to make this?" Marion asked, running her hands over the smooth armrests. "Lots of sleepless nights after Sarah died. I'd go to the barn and work until exhaustion let me rest without dreaming." He knelt beside the chair, his hand covering hers. Seemed right to use those skills for something good now, something that represents life instead of loss. She pulled him up and kissed him, this man who'd transformed from a grief-haunted hermit into the loving husband and father she'd never dared hope for. "It's perfect. Everything is perfect." They spent Christmas Day in peaceful domesticity, a family dinner, Harlan reading the Christmas story from his father's Bible, the children playing with their gifts while Hope dozed in her cradle. That evening, after Tom and Elsie had been tucked into bed and Hope was sleeping soundly, Harlan and Marion sat together by the fire in her new rocking chair, her in his lap as they'd done countless times before. "A year ago, you walked up to me in Winter's Bluff and asked if I wanted a housekeeper or another winter alone," Harlan said quietly. "Changed my entire life with one question." "Best question I ever asked." Marion nestled closer, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and pine and the soap she made. "Though technically, I didn't just ask about a housekeeper. I asked if you wanted another winter alone. That was the real question. And I was too stubborn and scared to hear it properly. Took me weeks to understand you weren't just offering to keep house. You were offering connection, family, a reason to stop hiding from life." "Did you know?" Marion asked, something she'd wondered about for months. "When you agreed to the marriage arrangement, did you know you were falling for me? Or did it surprise you?" Harlan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I knew I was in trouble the night I saved Tom the first time. When I saw how you fought for him, how you refused to let grief or fear or impossible odds stop you from protecting your child, that kind of fierce love, it called to something in me I thought was dead. And then you kept surprising me, kept pushing past my walls, kept believing I was worth fighting for. He kissed her forehead. So yes, I knew. But I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. Easier to call it gratitude or convenience than to face the truth. What truth? That you were exactly what I needed. That loving you was inevitable from the moment you stood in that street, shivering and desperate and brave enough to approach the man everyone else avoided. I think I started falling for you right then, in that first conversation. The rest was just me catching up to what my heart already knew. Marion's eyes filled with happy tears. I love you, Harlan Creed. I love the life we've built, and the family we're raising, and the future stretching out before us. I love all of it. I love you too. Love you with everything I am and everything I hope to become. He tightened his arms around her. Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for not giving up when I said no the first time. Thank you for seeing past the scars to the man I could be again. They sat together as the fire burned low, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built something extraordinary from the ashes of their separate griefs. Outside, the Montana winter raged with its customary ferocity. But inside, wrapped in warmth and love and the absolute certainty that they belonged together, Marion and Harlan faced it without fear. Spring returned, as it always did, transforming the valley into the riot of green and color Harlan had promised Tom during that desperate night of illness. The meadows filled with wildflowers, the creek ran loud with meltwater, and new calves wobbled after their mothers in the pastures. Hope was 6 months old, a chubby, happy baby who'd recently discovered her feet and spent long periods studying them with fascination. On the anniversary of Marion's arrival in Winter's Bluff, Harlan declared a celebration. They rode to town as a family, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago when Harlan barely spoke to anyone. Now he greeted neighbors with genuine warmth, accepted congratulations on Hope's arrival with pride, and stood with his arm around Marion as if declaring to the world that he'd finally rejoined the living. They visited the cemetery where Harlan's parents and Sarah rested, bringing flowers and introducing Hope to the family she'd never meet. "This is your grandmother Mercy," Harlan told his daughter, holding her up to see the headstone. "She would have loved you so much, would have spoiled you rotten, just like I'm doing." "And this is Sarah," Marion added, approaching the other grave. "Your papa's first wife, who loved him well and gave him happy memories to carry forward. We honor her memory by living fully, by loving deeply, by never taking our time together for granted." It was a ritual they'd continue every year, teaching Hope and any future children about the people who'd come before, the sacrifices that had built their family's legacy, the love that transcended death and time. That evening, back at the ranch, Harlan pulled Marion aside while Mrs. Halstead entertained the children. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small carved box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple gold with a small sapphire that matched the Montana sky. "We got married so fast, I never gave you a proper engagement ring, never courted you the way you deserved, but I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that represents what we've become rather than what we started as." Marion's hands trembled as he slipped it onto her finger alongside her plain wedding band. "Harlan, it's gorgeous." "You deserve gorgeous. You deserve everything." He pulled her close, his scarred face soft with love. "You walked into my life asking if I wanted another winter alone, and you gave me every season filled with love and purpose and joy. I can never repay that gift, but I can spend the rest of my life trying. You already have. You gave me a home when I was homeless, hope when I was desperate, love when I'd given up on finding it again. We saved each other, remember? Best rescue mission either of us ever undertook." He kissed her, gentle and thorough, and Marion felt the rightness of it all the way to her bones. They'd started as strangers bound by necessity. They'd survived winter storms and legal battles and the ghosts of their separate pasts. They'd built a family from broken pieces and taught each other that courage meant facing fear rather than running from it. The cowboy who'd refused every woman in the county had found his match in the widow brave enough to ask the right question. And together they'd created something neither could have built alone. A home full of love, a family bound by choice rather than just blood, a future bright with promise and possibility. No more winters alone. No more half living in the shadows of what had been lost. Just the warmth of love, the strength of family, and the absolute certainty that they'd face whatever came next together. Their story had begun with a desperate question in the winter wind. It continued with courage, perseverance, and love that refused to quit. And as Harlan Creed stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold, his wife beside him and his children's laughter echoing through the house they'd built together, he knew with absolute certainty that every hard winter, every moment of grief, every year of loneliness had been worth it. Because it had all led here, to this moment, this family, this life that was finally, blessedly, whole. Home wasn't just a place. It was people who fought for each other, who chose love over fear, who built something beautiful from the ashes of what had been lost. And Harlan Creed, the man who'd spent 8 years refusing to hope, had finally found his way home.